A Friday night in late March, the cold made your Brer visible after sunset. I was 17 in my final year of high school in Cali. My friends Ewan, Gran and Lisa were hanging out near Hikozar Park. We sat on a low stone wall by head dunes, eating chips and waiting. The I'd roll in. I will remember how his street's lights barely reached our spore, leaving us mostly in darkness. Sometime around 9:30 or 10, something strange happened. First, an unnatural silence fell. The waves were still present. Bow Hikan coastal wind had vanished completely. We had been joking around when Lisa suddenly pointed toward he water, asking what she saw. A furs I have, she might mean a boa's light bar. No boa was in sight. 3 distant light hovered just above the horizon. They were evenly spaced, glowing a dull orange like dying embers, perfectly still. Hey numb hair flickered, nor moved. We sewed up on Huel for a beer view. These lights were positioned far enough. We couldn't determine if they were over water or in the sky. In Reed filming, which his phone bubbly screen showed only black. He read again why he flash on. Yeah, he go same reason. Bruce Rad he shoved, he phone back in his pocket. We was said his light for a bow mini rying a make sense of him. No sound, no movement. Suddenly, while we were discussing whether he could be flares or some unknown aircraft, the middle light dropped his ray down. In big was why. Or so I appeared. There seemed the other ways to blink tie, leaving only dark sea behind. We wired hoping for something more, but nothing happened. Soon after he wed rushed back cold, and Salvi we decided, keep as o ourselves agreeing I sounded too weird to share with our parents he weekend passed normally. And by Monday morning's first period mare, as class I seemed like you. Allah her, unusual nigh something felt strange, how day Mrs. Gowie, our heir left he room briefly and returned, looking unsaying us. Oh, keep reading quay. Through he window. I spoiled window. I spo you men walking down he corridor. He safer room. Hey, were dressed identically in black suits. Their white shirts were crisp ties, perfectly black. One tall and lean, the other shorter but broader. They seemed out of place in our school. During lunch, whispers from a young teacher near the staff room sent a chill through me. They were asking about the sky, a question none of us had discussed. Lisa, Yuan, and Gran had noticed these strangers too, confirming something felt off. Mr. Spidey felt off.
Mr. Sterling Forbes looked uncomfortable as the men spoke quietly with him.
Their glances weren't casual. They seemed to be mentally checking off faces as we passed. By the last period, they had vanished completely. When we asked an office staff member about them, she deflected with a tone that suggested she didn't want to discuss it further. That night at Lisa's, we were unsettled. UN insisted we hadn't told anyone about the lights, and we were certain no online posts had been made. Strange occurrences began to accumulate over the next week. A black car regularly parked across from the school during lunch breaks. Engine off, windows up. The driver never emerged. When Gran tried getting a closer look, it drove away slowly. My phone started acting weird. During a call with Yuan, I heard strange clicking sounds and moments of dead silence. The screen recording app would open without my interaction. Lisa's mom had answered the house phone one night and heard only breathing. Weeks later, walking home after dark, I thought I spotted them across the street near the bus stop. Same suits, same stance, staring straight ahead. The passing car momentarily blocked my view, and when it moved, they had vanished. I wasn't sure if the encounter was real. The coastal path, where we'd seen the lights, remained a lingering mystery. And I was walking up Arthur's seat, camera in hand, more out of habit than serious photography. A pale winter blue sky hung overhead, and the city felt quiet and washed out, like the moment after snow melts. Halfway up the trail, something caught my attention. Bright and hovering just above the eastern slope, completely motionless. Initially, I thought it might be a drone or a weather balloon, but its behavior was different, perfectly still and symmetrical. It didn't reflect sunlight like the surrounding landscape. I took several photos, carefully focusing to ensure sharp images. The object remained stationary while city sounds faded to a background hum, and an odd stillness seemed to thicken the air. Then, in an instant, it vanished. No gradual fade, no movement, just gone. At home, I examined the images on my computer. There it was in multiple shots, bright, and clearly visible above the trees. Each time I zoomed and adjusted the contrast, the image reappeared. I didn't share this experience immediately. The next morning, arriving early at my small independent design studio in the old part of town, something felt different. That morning started like any other. I had just booted up my computer when the door opened. Two men entered sharp in black suits and white shirts. Their shoes gleamed so brightly they caught the morning light, sending reflections across the floor. The taller one spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "Good morning. We need to inspect your camera for errors." I froze. Something felt off. "My camera," I stammered. Unsure. He nodded toward the bag on my desk. "Please," he said, stepping closer with an unnerving silence, calculating eyes. We had returned once on a Sunday evening, but none of us could relax. Sounds seemed amplified. The gulls, the wind, the distant traffic. We didn't see any lights and left after just 10 minutes. Even now, when driving that route at night, I find myself scanning the horizon for those mysterious orange glows. Whenever someone at the school mentions inspectors or visitors, I recall those two men in black suits who somehow knew to ask about the sky before anyone had spoken. The room, the camera, the distance between my desk and window, all of it scrutinized with an unsettling precision. Something strange weighed in the air, compelling me to comply with their methodical, yet unusual handling. Whenever I tried to view the screen, they would subtly shift, blocking my perspective. After a few minutes, they exchanged a knowing glance. "Errors noted," Wong declared, "that will suffice." Then they vanished without a goodbye, leaving no trace on the dusty floor. Back home, I immediately checked my photos. The mysterious object had disappeared. Images that once clearly showed a bright shape hovering above a slope now displayed only normal clouds and sunlight. Raw files, different programs, even another computer. Nothing remained. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the object, but I knew the backup files from the night before had been intact. Now those two had changed. The folder remained, but the critical frame was altered. I called my photographer friend Mark, hoping for clarity. He suggested a lens flare, but I knew deep down this was something else. Strange details began to emerge in the following week. Black cars with tinted windows parked near the studio. Unfamiliar figures lingered just beyond view. Something had changed, and I was determined to understand why. 9 coats at the edge of the red street watching motionless, then vanishing when I looked directly at them. Rational explanations felt increasingly fragile. The camera incident, the missing object, the silent men in black, all of it made coincidence seem less plausible. One night, I returned to Arthur's Seat to ground myself, to see the place again, and perhaps capture another shot that would prove I wasn't imagining things. City lights twinkled below, mist rolling across the hills. My camera was ready, eyes scanning. Nothing appeared. No bright shape, no drone, no flare. But the feeling of being watched returned. Subtle, yet persistent. Shadows at the edge of my vision seemed exaggerated. Every slight movement in the fog felt like an intrusion. Since then, I've kept my camera close, never unattended at home or in the office. I rarely discuss the incident. There's no way to make sense of it. Sometimes I still check backup files, hoping the object will reappear, that some error might reverse itself. It never does. I can't explain their arrival or why the photos changed, only that they did. The men in black never returned, but I remained vigilant. On clear days when the wind cuts across the landscape, I remember the night hung dark and misty, stretching across an empty road. My old white transit van cruised steadily southward on the A9 near Perth, cutting through fine rain that had been falling all afternoon. The kind of rain that seems harmless until it soaks right through your jacket. Around 9 o'clock, something strange began to unfold. A light appeared in my side mirror, unlike anything I'd seen before. At first, I thought it might be a motorbike, but its movement was off, too steady, without the typical wobble or height variations of a bike. The glow wasn't sharp white like an LED, but softer, almost pale. The light matched my every movement precisely. When I slowed, it slowed. When I sped up to 7,075, it matched me exactly. The speedometer needle sat at 72, becoming my only reference point in a moment that felt increasingly surreal. Though I knew the speed limit for vans was 60, this long, empty road seemed to invite a different rhythm. That pale glow hung persistently in my rearview mirror, never reflecting on the road or the van's body. My hands began to sweat. Was this some kind of drone? The thought seemed absurd given the weather and our speed. Rain blurred my windscreen, leaving only that floating orb as a clear image. When I needed to overtake a slower vehicle, the light smoothly shifted position, aligning with my left rear quarter. Just before the Broxton roundabout, it vanished. No fade, no dramatic departure, simply gone. I slowed to 50, half expecting its return. Nothing. By the time I reached home in Craigie, I'd rationalized the experience as a strange vehicle light or reflection. My wife noticed my paleness, but I brushed it off as tiredness. 3 days later, 2 men appeared at my garage. They stood side by side, both in dark suits, white shirts, thin black ties, but no mud on their polished shoes, no signs of the morning's drizzle. One was tall, with a narrow face and slicked-back dark hair. The other was shorter, with nearly invisible pale eyebrows. Both looked to be in their mid-40s. The tall one spoke first. A strange morning at the garage began with 2 peculiar visitors. A tall and short pair arrived, standing silently. When they first appeared, something felt off. The man spoke in a flat, emotionless voice, asking if my speedometer had stopped at 72. I wasn't sure what was happening. I responded with a nervous laugh, insisting the speedometer worked perfectly fine. He tilted his head slightly bird-like and repeated the question. His companion remained absolutely silent, staring with unsettling light grey eyes that made me uncomfortable. I tried to sound normal, explaining this was a garage and asking if they needed something fixed. They slowly scanned everything. Tire racks, oil drums, the floor. The woman finally spoke, more declaring than asking, "Were you alone?" When I questioned her, she had already turned to her companion. They exchanged a look I couldn't understand. Without warning, they walked out. I followed to the door, but they were already halfway down the lane, moving in perfect synchronization toward the street. No car, no umbrella, just walking away. After they turned the corner, I noticed my phone was black, despite being fully charged. No calls came through that morning, which was unusual for a Friday. I worked and tried to dismiss the encounter. Small oddities began to accumulate. Customers mentioned council workers had been asking about me. The van's dash clock randomly ran 2 hours slow. One morning, I started locking the van inside the unit. Some nights I thought I saw an old black Jaguar near the estate, but it would vanish when I tried to get closer. 2 inquiries about the encounter. I'd brush it off as probably being inspectors or a drone, but something felt deeply unsettling. A month later, working late one night by the shed near Loyek, I stepped out with tea as midnight approached. That's when I first truly saw them. Lights moving in a way that defied explanation. There were these white points darting across the sky in ways no aircraft or satellite should, maybe 3 or 4 of them zipping across in less than a second, then stopping dead. At one point, they formed a triangle before splitting apart. No sound, no trails, just strange lights dancing overhead. I stood watching, completely lost track of time. Minutes, or maybe 10. I couldn't tell. When I tried to grab my phone, the sky was already empty. I didn't tell anyone about it, not out of fear, but because I knew how crazy it would sound. My neighbor Callan would have just laughed it off as local folklore or military exercises. A week later, an unusual knock came at my door. 3 even taps, a pause, then 2 more. When I opened it, 2 men in plain black suits stood there. No car, no footprints on the wet gravel. They looked completely dry despite the drizzle. The taller one spoke first, his voice flat and emotionless. "Have you heard the clicking noise?" No introduction, no pleasantries. I responded, genuinely confused. "What clicking noise?" Now that night keeps playing in my mind. They didn't ask if I'd seen anything or been on the road. They spoke as if they already knew. I still drive that route some nights out of habit. The stretch near Litty feels different now. I keep watching the mirrors, waiting for that pale glow to reappear. It hasn't. But every time my speedometer nears 72, my palms start sweating just like that night. Without thinking, I ease back down to 60. The shorter man stood silently staring at me with pale grey eyes that seemed unfocused. His face was completely blank. I asked if they were with the council, wondering if this was about the pasture or the boat. They didn't respond. The taller one scanned by hallway walls before delivering a precise instruction. "If you notice the clicking, note the intervals." As quickly as they'd arrived, They both turned and walked down the gravel drive. By the time I got my boots on and went outside, they were gone. The drive is long and straight with a clear view to the road. The only other living thing nearby was the neighbor's collie. I claimed I hadn't heard anything. The taller man tilted his head, listening like a bird. "No clicks at all," he said, though it didn't sound like a real question. In the stillness of night, drizzle and balls were my only companions. Lying in bed, a faint clicking emerged, like a fingernail tapping against glass. Irregular and barely perceptible. It drew me to search everywhere. I checked the boiler, fuse box, and fridge, but found nothing. Each time I believed the sound had ceased, it would restart. Sometimes a single sharp tap, other times a cluster resembling an incomprehensible code. My attempts to record it revealed only room noise. This continued for a week with no men in suits returning and no strange lights appearing. I stopped acknowledging the sound even to myself. Denial became my strategy. The radio became my shield against the silence, masking those soft clicks. But when switched off for sleep, the sounds returned, softer yet still present. One evening, an old black Jaguar with unreadable plates parked down the lane. As I stepped outside, it rolled away slowly without lights. The sheep remained undisturbed. 2 weeks after my initial encounter, I woke at 3 a.m. to find my kitchen light on, something I'd never do. The back door was locked, but the bolt sat oddly. Small details seemed slightly off. My mug had moved from sink to table, and my boots were turned outward. The clicks evolved. Less random now, more structured. 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2, exactly matching the original knock. Though I hadn't seen the men again, a persistent feeling of being watched crept in during my late-night smoking breaks. No movement, no shapes, just an unsettling presence. I kept silent. How could I explain this to Callum or anyone else? 3 weeks had passed since their initial visit. No follow-up, no letters, just one haunting question lingering. Have you heard the clicking noise? Late October found me camping near Lochmont, cold and damp. Fog rolled off the water in thick waves. I'd chosen a secluded clearing near the northern shore, far from the main parking area. My plan was simple. Set up the tent, start a fire, spend the night reading and listening. By 8 p.m., the fog had thickened. The tree became almost invisible. The water lay flat, a dark sheet reflecting nothing. As I leaned back in my folding chair, the lights first caught my attention. 2 small, bright white dots, like headlamps, caught my attention. They were fellow campers, but something felt off. Standing perfectly upright and human-sized, they didn't move. The more I watched, the more certain I became that these weren't ordinary figures. Dark suits blended into the misty landscape where no path, road, or dock existed. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it might be a fog-induced illusion, yet when I looked again, they remained. The wind pushed the fog, gradually revealing their rigid, unnatural shapes. Hours passed and my fire crackled lower. The figures stood motionless at the edge of my vision. I couldn't make out their faces, just dark outlines merging with the landscape. At first, I tried to ignore them, convincing myself I was imagining things. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. 1 hour became 2, and they remained perfectly still. Between staring at the fire and pouring water into my kettle, I'd catch glimpses of them. Once I thought I saw one shift slightly, but it might have been a trick of the thick fog. Something prevented me from calling out. It wasn't traditional fear, but a strange awareness that my presence mattered in ways I couldn't comprehend. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, the fog was so dense I could barely see the shoreline. When I finally grabbed my flashlight and swept its beam across the landscape, the men were gone, not hidden, completely absent. No trace remained where they had stood. I searched the trees, finding nothing. The water lay flat and empty. Then I heard it, leaves crunching softly, steadily. From the tree, 2 figures emerged where no path existed. They walked deliberately, moving upright toward a distant point before vanishing behind another line of trees. Their black silhouettes blended seamlessly with the night fog. At dawn, when the mist lifted, I inspected the ground. Impossibly, there were no footprints, no crushed grass, not even a broken twig. The clearing looked untouched. I packed my gear slowly, half expecting them to reappear. Driving back to my flat in Glasgow, I continuously checked the rear-view mirror. The A82 stretched empty behind me. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt like a dream. Something I was meant to forget, yet couldn't. The farm has been in my family since my grandfather's time. A stone farmhouse, a few fields, and a barn sitting about 15 miles outside. It was late October with those damp nights. One night, when the air hung thick and stars blurred behind a misty veil, I went out to the north field around midnight. The sheep had been unsettled earlier, and something compelled me to investigate. That's when I saw it, a glow hovering just above the tree at the far end of the field. At first, I thought it might be a helicopter or searchlight from a local event, but there was no sound, not even the distant hum of a rotor or engine. The glow wasn't a beam of light either. It seemed contained like part of a solid shape. Yet the shape itself was difficult to define. I've tried to rationalize the experience. Maybe it was another camper, a prank, or a trick of fog and imagination, that the way they appeared and disappeared, and the fact that no path or boat could have brought them here defied logic. I don't know what they were doing or why they were watching me, but I knew one thing. Whatever it was, they had been waiting, and I had somehow stumbled into their observation. When I tried talking to friends, most dismissed it as other campers or fog, playing tricks. But I knew what I saw. I camp often, usually alone, and I've never seen anyone appear or disappear like that. Weeks later, I returned to the spot in daylight, retracing my route to the clearing. The shoreline was empty. The trees were the same. Nothing suggested anyone had been there at all. I never saw the figures again. I haven't seen anyone in a black suit since, and I haven't returned to that campsite at night. But sometimes driving along the A82 after work, when the light hits the water in a certain way, I catch a shadow or a flicker in the corner of my eye. I swear I see them standing at the edge of the loch, still watching. I tell the story only now because it's been years and it stayed with me, tucked into the back of my mind where I can't quite reach it. Some nights I still picture them out there, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even writing this, I check the windows, half expecting to see them on the far shore, standing silently, staring back. The strange light shifted depending on how I moved my head. Standing at the fence, my breath visible in the cold air. I listened. Silence hung heavy. The sheep, usually skittish, were now pressed together near the barn, unnaturally still. A weird pressure pulsed in my ears, similar to the sensation before diving underwater. After about 30 seconds, the glow dimmed. Inside, I quickly noted the time and direction of the light I'd seen. The next morning, around 7, I stepped outside to feed the animals with highland fog draped low like a wet cloth. At the far edge of my property, just past the stone wall overlooking the north field, 2 men in black suits stood completely motionless. They weren't talking or moving, just staring straight up at the sky. Something felt distinctly off about them. Their suits seemed out of place in this damp hillside setting, but their absolute stillness was even more unnerving. No shifting weight, no adjusting feet, no visible breath clouds. They were like statues. My gut warned me not to call out. While preparing feed buckets, I kept glancing back. They remained perfectly still. Their faces were hard to discern, but I glimpsed pale skin, dark hair, possibly sunglasses, though the sun hadn't fully risen. I tried to ignore them and continue my chores, but each time I looked up, they were still watching the sky. About 10 minutes passed. At one point, I turned my back completely to enter the barn for another feed sack. When I returned just 30 seconds later, they were gone. No car, no footprints on the damp grass, just an empty hillside and rolling fog. Walking to their previous spot with my heart racing, I saw the grass was flattened where they'd stood. I scanned the fields, the lane, even the small road running parallel to my land. Nothing. The sheep, which had been restless while I was in the barn, had moved to the opposite end of the field. There, my dog confirmed something was strange. Normally fearless, he stood at the barn door with his tail down, refusing to cross the fence line. Even when I called him that night, when the mist rolled back and the stars came out, I felt a soft, rhythmic pressure in my ears like being underwater. Nothing moved in the sky. The sheep huddled tightly by the barn, and I watched through the window, lights off, scanning the property's edge for any movement. For 3 more mornings, I checked the field at dawn. No men in suits appeared, no mysterious glow above the trees, but the sheep remained reluctant to graze in the north field. They'd take a few steps in, then back away, clustering together as if an unseen force kept them at bay that night. Claire and I had just finished unpacking boxes in her new terrace house near Dundee's outskirts well past midnight. The residential road was short, lined with old brick houses, and a single orange street light marking the corner. When we stepped outside for some air, the stillness was unnerving. No distant cars, no barking dogs, just absolute quiet. Claire lit a cigarette and motioned for me to look up. Over the rooftops, not far above, a triangular shape hung in the night sky. We stood completely motionless. A strange object marked by 3 points of white light with a faint red glow in the center suspended above us. It wasn't massive, but close enough that we could make out its darker edges against the sky. The thing simply hung there, completely stationary. We whispered to each other, though neither of us understood why we were being so quiet. Claire tried to capture it on her phone, but the screen stayed black, refusing to record anything. After 2 attempts, she gave up. We watched as the red center pulsed once, and then the corner lights blinked in sequence, 1, 2, 3, like stage running lights. This repeated twice before everything went completely dark. There was no movement when it disappeared. No sudden speed, no upward climb. It simply wasn't there anymore. We stood shivering, staring at the empty sky until Claire finally said, "Let's go inside." That night, neither of us slept well. We didn't tell anyone, not our neighbors, not our families. We barely discussed it between ourselves afterward. This wasn't the first time I'd encountered something inexplicable. Weeks earlier, an invisible barrier had prevented movement in a specific area. I'd eventually stopped trying to force through and fenced off the space. Standing at its edge felt different. The air seemed heavier with a quiet pressure almost tangible against my skin. I never saw those 2 silent men in black suits again. The ones I'd spotted staring at the sky in the time and never missed. I've had strangers pass through before. Lost hikers, surveyors, kids on bikes, but nothing like this. Nothing that leaves an entire field feeling so fundamentally wrong. Now, whenever I step outside at night, I find myself glancing at that tree, half expecting the glow to return or those 2 figures to reappear, their attention fixed on something beyond my comprehension. The evening was dark and drizzling when we stood at the bus stop on the high street. Street lights cast a slick sheen on the pavement and we were alone. A week after that first night, a man approached from the opposite direction of the main road. His appearance was striking. A black overcoat, black suit, white shirt, and black tie. No hat or gloves despite the cold, neatly parted hair, and clean shaven. He stopped a few feet away and looked directly at us. Without a greeting, he asked clearly, "Did the lights blink in sequence?" Before Claire could respond, he turned and walked away, not hurriedly or nervously, just a calm stroll back the way he'd come, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. We sat frozen. The bus came and went without us. Strange events followed. One evening, leaving Claire's place, I spotted a black car parked at the street's end, engine off, windows tinted, the driver's silhouette barely visible. When I approached, the car started and rolled away slowly as if it had been waiting. Claire mentioned her landline rang twice late at night. Each time, no one was there, just a faint clicking sound, like an old tape recorder. Another night, a bright white light appeared through the curtains. No engine noise. By the time I looked, the street was empty. Weeks later, standing at the same bus stop, I saw a tall figure at the street's far end, under a lamp, wearing a black coat, hands in his pockets, completely motionless. A passing bus blocked my view, and when it moved, he had vanished. We tried reasoning it out, maybe a new drone type. Perhaps he'd overheard us, but nothing made sense. We had been completely alone when we saw the craft. We hadn't told anyone. The only people who knew were me and Claire, and she swore she hadn't mentioned it to a soul. By January, Claire moved closer to the city centre. The car stopped showing up. The phone calls ceased. We never got an explanation. Driving home late one night from a friend's place near Stirling, the roads were quiet and slick with a thin mist settled over the hills. My headlights cut through the fog in long, narrow beams. As I carefully watched the roads bend, still thinking about swerving around a deer from the week before. On a long stretch between the village and city outskirts, something caught my eye. At first I thought it was a shadow, maybe a fallen branch. Then it moved, crossing the road slowly and deliberately, completely silent, a black shape low to the ground with edges that didn't reflect my headlights like a normal object would. I slammed the brakes instinctively, heart pounding. This didn't move like an animal. Instead, it glided smoothly across the road and disappeared into the mist. I sat gripping the wheel, convinced I must have imagined it, that my eyes were playing tricks. Who would believe such a story? I told no one. Not friends, not my partner. Continuing home slowly, I kept glancing into the rearview mirror. The mist hung low on the streets, an unsettling feeling of being watched consuming me. A few nights later, I was having a late dinner in my flat. The radiator humming softly in the background, a deliberate slow knock interrupted my meal. Most people who visited at this hour either called ahead or didn't knock at all. When I opened the door, 2 men stood before me dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, black ties, and shoes that gleamed in the hallway light. Their faces were blank, pale in the porch's glow. "Good evening," one said evenly. "Is your vehicle still functioning?" The question struck me as bizarre. My car worked fine, as far as I knew. Yet something in his tone suggested he already knew something I didn't. Yes, I managed my voice higher than usual. They nodded slightly, offering no further explanation. The shorter man studied me from head to toe, not threateningly, not friendly, just observing. Before I could ask what they meant, they turned and walked down the stairs, vanishing into the fog. No car started, no footsteps faded. They were simply gone. In the following nights, strange occurrences became routine. Street lights flickered at odd intervals. Shadows that matched no visible object danced at my periphery. Whenever I wait for a bus at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting a man in a black suit to ask me a question I won't know how to answer. Cutting across the park near the canal, I spotted a line of lights, hanging low, moving differently from any aircraft I knew. They were too quiet, too close, with lights that didn't match anything I'd seen before. Since that moment, things started feeling off. I began logging strange occurrences on my phone, tracking these unusual moments. Sometimes, when scrolling back, I'd find entries I didn't remember writing. Notes in my own handwriting described times and places I wasn't sure I'd been. Was I sleepwalking, dozing off while driving? No accidents had occurred, no bruises, just a growing sense of disorientation. Then came the foggy grocery run that changed everything. The mist was heavier than usual, clinging to the road. Suddenly, a low black shape crossed in front of my car, moving silently between fog and headlights as if belonging to another world. I slammed the brakes. It vanished. No sound, no trace, as if it had never existed. That night, sleep was impossible. I stared at my car in the driveway, barely visible in the dim streetlight. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like a warning. I imagined someone watching, checking if the car still worked. Eventually, I tried returning to normal. I drove less at night, avoided certain roads, kept windows closed. The men in black never returned. No knocking, no watching. The black shape disappeared, at least from my view, but the memory lingers. During my commute, I repeatedly noticed unusual black cars, older sedans with heavily tinted windows, always parked in strange locations, always seemingly empty. I started checking locks and windows multiple times each night, the sensation of being watched growing increasingly oppressive. Something was definitely not right, though I couldn't explain exactly what. A distant car engine started, only to find nothing on the road. Dark figures seemed to move behind the mist at the street's edge, disappearing when I approached. My unease wasn't pure air, but a low vibration that burrowed deep into my chest. This weirdness extended beyond my flat. Late one night, something strange happened. I saw 6 or 7 white spheres in the sky, glowing and shifting, connected by what seemed like an invisible thread. They hung there for maybe half a minute before tilting and sliding behind the clouds. No sound, no trail, just gone. When I mentioned this to Pratt on the radio, it was a short, unremarkable description. He joked that I needed another pint as usual. That was supposed to be the end of it. The stranger then showed up at my door. Paul around 6'2", wearing a pressed black suit with a white shirt buttoned all the way up. No tie. His appearance was striking, pale skin, narrow-faced, dark hair combed flat. He looked to be in his early 40s, though. Something about him was hard to pinpoint. What really caught my attention were his eyes. Not their color, but how he stared, unblinking and fixed, as if he hadn't quite mastered eye contact. "Mr. Stair, Princess, Mr. Stair, Parker," he said. That was my name, so I nodded. He didn't introduce himself or offer a handshake. Instead, he walked into my living room with calculated steps, pausing to scan my surroundings. His gaze swept over my bookshelf, a half-empty water glass, and a stack of unopened mail. Then he turned to me and spoke with unsettling calmness. He wanted to know about the sound patterns I noticed. This caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned any sounds to anyone, not even on the radio when I had initially described the incident to Graham. The whole thing had been eerily silent. I told him exactly that. No hum, no vibration, nothing. He tilted his head slightly, as if he didn't quite believe me. His words were slow and deliberate, seemingly rehearsed. Again, I insisted, just lights, nothing more. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity before sitting in my armchair, without invitation, moving with a strange, stiff precision. People were sitting around, but they hadn't practiced much. He folded his hands on his knees and began asking about the exact arrangement of the lights. I tried to describe it as best I could, but he kept interrupting with specific questions about how the lights worked. He asked if they pulsed in sequence, if they overlapped, or if their movements followed any particular pattern. At Cuffort's Hospital, a small regional facility near Manchester, most nights were predictable. All the patients with typical ailments like falls or respiratory problems filled our beds. But one night about 6 years ago, everything changed. Around 1:30 in the morning, paramedics arrived with Alan Webster from a nearby village. His arrival was different from our usual admissions. During our encounter, something peculiar unfolded. He spoke about brightness shifting in cycles, using precise words like pulses and cycles. His intense focus made me uneasy. No notebook, no phone, just sitting and staring, asking questions that seemed oddly specific. When he asked if I'd experienced unusual dreams since a certain sighting, I was caught off guard. I denied having strange dreams, but admitted to waking up suddenly at night, heart racing with no memory of what I'd been dreaming. I kept the most unsettling details to myself. After about 20 minutes, he stood up abruptly. Without saying goodbye or thank you, he cryptically stated, "If you notice the sounds, you will know what they mean." He walked to the door, opened it himself, and stepped into the hallway. Curiosity drew me to follow him. He descended the stairs slowly, almost mechanically, leaning over the railing. I expected to hear the front door open, but there was only silence. After waiting a minute, I went downstairs. The entryway was empty, and outside, only one car sat under the street lamp. No trace of him remained. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept replaying our conversation, particularly his comment about sound patterns. Something felt off. Was there a sound I'd missed, or was he deliberately planting ideas in my mind? A week later, something strange happened. While brushing my teeth with the bathroom window cracked open, I heard a low, steady hum. Initially, I thought it might be the boiler or distant traffic, but it wasn't. The sound was deeper, more consistent, like standing near an electric transformer yet coming from outside. I turned off the tap and listened. The hum lasted about a minute before fading completely. Rushing to the window, I scanned the street. Everything looked normal. The same cars, the same empty pavement. I never saw the man again. A wiry man in his late 30s, wearing muddy boots and a jacket that smelled of wood smoke, had collapsed in a field after calling emergency services himself while walking his dog. His vitals were stable. Alan Webster was visibly distressed, constantly trying to sit up and looking toward the window. He seemed to be expecting something to still be present. His dog had run off and hadn't returned. When I questioned him about his experience, he described a silent disk of light circling over the tree. No sound at all. That's the worst of it, he emphasized. His speech slurred, suggesting he was recovering from a faint. He kept repeating, "I was right above me. I couldn't move." The lights were everywhere. The paramedics seemed dismissive, rolling their eyes and muttering about late-night television. Despite his state, we admitted him for overnight observation. Alan claimed he blacked out when something moved overhead, and upon regaining consciousness, temporarily lost sensation in his hands. I documented everything professionally, though part of me attributed his account to stress or dehydration. Around 3 a.m., while completing charts at the nurse's station, 2 men entered the ward through the main doors. This immediately struck me as odd since we locked down everything at that hour, and visitors must buzz the front desk downstairs. Both wore standard black suits with white shirts and black ties with polished shoes. One was shorter, bold, with pale skin. The other taller, dark-haired, appearing to be in his early 40s. What unsettled me most was their synchronized, purposeful movement, no wasted motion. Walking directly to the desk, the shorter man asked in a flat tone, "Where is Mr. Steppert, Tone? Where is Mr. Steppert? Store? Where is Mr. Starr? Where is Mr. Stadder? P. Where is Mr. Staver? P. Star? Care Pair." Hospitals can be strange places, especially late at night. There was something unsettling about the two men who showed up at my desk, both staring intently, claiming to be from administration. Their appearance and behavior felt off. The taller man's voice was calm, but his accent suggested he wasn't local or even clearly British, almost like he had learned the words phonetically. I told them visiting hours were over, but the shorter man leaned closer, his fingernails oddly smooth like plastic. "We need to speak with Mr. Thin to speak to Mr. Stouter Webster." Now, he said in a way that made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I gave them his room number, but insisted I check with the charge nurse before letting them in. They didn't wait, walking past me down the corridor. Now, I followed them down the hall, their shoes clicking in unison. By the time I reached Alan's room, the door was already shut. Through the glass panel, I could see two men standing on either side of his bed. Alan was wide awake, his eyes darting between them, his mouth moved rapidly, though I couldn't hear the words. One man held a small notepad, but wasn't writing anything. I tapped on the door, but no one turned. For a split second, Alan looked at me, and the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. Then the taller man leaned in and said something, and Alan's face went blank. They stayed about 10 minutes. When they left, I stepped forward to ask for identification. "He has been discharged," the taller man said directly. No paperwork, no consultation. I rushed into the room. Alan's bed was empty. The sheets were pulled back, but he was nowhere. Not in the bathroom, not in the hallway. His clothes and boots were gone, too. I tried to chase after the men, but the corridor was completely empty. I ran to the stairwell and lobby, finding nothing. Security insisted no one had come through the front doors in the last half hour. Things only got stranger by morning. Alan's admission record had vanished from the system. No file, no wristband, nothing. When I inquired, they claimed the patient number I provided didn't exist. The paramedics who had brought him in denied ever transporting anyone by that name. I checked the incident book myself and confirmed my 1:45 a.m. entry for Alan Webster, but now it was as if he had never existed. Niall and Webster had vanished from the hospital ward without a trace. No one seemed to remember him clearly. Only Claire, a night aide, revealed something strange. She had witnessed two men escorting Alan from his room. He walked unsteadily between them, almost like someone sleepwalking. When we checked the ward CCTV footage, a 15-minute gap existed exactly during that time. No discharge papers were filed. No doctor signed off. Officially, Alan Webster was never even admitted. Weeks after his disappearance, odd occurrences began haunting me. The stairwell light would flicker only when I was alone. Automatic doors at the front would unexpectedly open around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. once, leaving my shift near dawn. I spotted a black sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. The moment I turned to look directly at it, it slowly drove away without headlights. I never saw Alan again. Late one August evening on Low Rannoch after sunset, fishing was my usual routine. Small ripples caught the last hints of daylight, darkening the water's surface. I'd fished this area for years, always hoping to catch a trout or two for dinner. Something unusual broke my concentration. The water began moving strangely, not from wind or fish, but something deeper and more mysterious. A soft glow appeared beneath the surface, shifting slowly as if following a hidden pattern. Nothing was out there, yet the glow moved in almost perfect arcs, sometimes disappearing and reappearing a few feet away. I watched longer than intended, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Eventually, I packed up and shook my head. I told no one. Not my fishing companion, not anyone. It was one of those experiences you file away, unsure if it even happened. The next morning at the dock, while cleaning my nets, I noticed a distinctive black sedan parked at the far end, old and weathered like something from the 90s. It sat with tinted windows darker than usual, Two men in crisp black suits and gleaming shoes stepped out, walking toward me with an unsettling precision. The tall one spoke first, his voice calm and flat. "How many times have you seen the movement?" I blinked, uncertain what he meant. Movement? I hadn't told anyone about the previous night's strange occurrence. These strangers seemed to know something they shouldn't, and I claimed I didn't understand. The shorter man stepped closer, his ash-grey eyes fixed on me steadily. "You know the pattern, the light," he said. Something in his gaze made me uncomfortable. I finally admitted I'd seen it only once, and even speaking those words felt wrong. A quick glance passed between them so fast I almost missed it. Something unreadable flickered in that exchange. Confusion, disbelief, or something else entirely. They turned and walked back to their car with an unnatural gait that didn't seem quite human. Neither fully opened their door before sitting, and the car started without a sound, sliding into the gravel like morning mist. Then it was gone, as if it had never existed. I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself I'd imagined it. But later, something unsettled me. When I checked the dock, the gravel remained undisturbed with no trace of tire tracks. It was pristine, as if nothing had happened. That evening, I returned to the dock. The water surface was smooth and black, silent. Yet, I knew something was different. The self not even telling my wife. Not even telling my wife. The memory of two men who knew something I never said haunted me. I haven't returned to that part of the loch since. I still fish the area, just not there. Late September, about 10 years back, I was living in a small village outside Inverry in Aberdeen. This quiet place was surrounded by barely 2 shops and a pub to speak of. Nights were darker then, no street lights beyond the main road, and on clear nights stars stretched uninterrupted across the sky. One night, just after 11, I was walking home from a friend's house. The air carried that early autumn sharpness, and fields were heavy with cut silage. My torch illuminated the dirt path, helping me avoid tripping on ruts. When I finally looked up, something caught my eye above the tree. The shape was blocking out part of the stars. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it was too precise. 3 straight edges forming a perfect triangle. I stopped walking completely still. It moved slowly, silently, gliding without a sound. No engine noise, no branch rustling like a low-flying plane might cause. 3 white lights, steady and unblinking, outlined its edges. It passed directly overhead in maybe 20 seconds, then continued toward the hills, blending back into darkness. I didn't run home, but I felt frozen, my body unsure how to react. Something about those 2 men who asked questions stayed with me. They were precise, methodical, checking a record I didn't know existed. The way they looked at each other after I spoke once, it was strange. They vanished like they were never real. Now, when the wind is right and the loch is dark, I sometimes imagine them walking up the hill toward my cabin again. Part of me wants answers, but another part knows I'd rather not find out. So, I watch from the hill's edge, letting memories sit quietly like the water surface, a place I'll never fish near again. Fell, watched like I wasn't supposed to be here. I packed up early and walked back to my small cabin, scanning the tree constantly. I saw no one, but kept looking, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a suit or a watch reflection. For nights afterwards, shadows near the dock's edge haunted my peripheral vision. They were outside my window, but every time I stepped out, they disappeared. No car, no people, nothing. The loch seemed different somehow. Quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. Sleep became a restless replay of those moments. The next morning brought bright streets washed clean by recent rain. Walking to the shop, I was halfway down the lane near the old church when a man appeared from around the corner. His appearance was striking. Black suit, white shirt, thin black tie. In our small village, such formal attire was rare outside of Sunday service or funerals. He stopped directly in my path, his presence unsettling. Pale skin and dark eyes held an unnatural stillness. No twitching, no blinking, just a frozen, intense gaze. And he spoke, his voice calm but strange. Did he craft rotate? The question caught me off guard. How did he know? I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen. Hadn't even fully processed it myself. When I asked him to clarify, he repeated the exact same words almost reflexively. I responded that the object had simply glided flat. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized I'd revealed more than I intended. He nodded as if confirming something, then walked away down the narrow street by the church. Something compelled me to follow, but when I turned the corner, the lane was completely empty. I walked to the turn end, emerging into an open field with no possible hiding spots, no gates, no vehicles. Nothing explained his sudden disappearance. In the following days, odd occurrences began to unsettle me. My typically calm dog barked repeatedly at the garden gate, always just before 2 a.m. Once I thought I'd glimpsed car idling at the field's edge, its lights extinguished. The phrase, "Did the craft rotate?" echoed in my mind, a persistent reminder that something unexplained had happened. Laura and I had planned a weekend camping trip, eager to test out her new gear before autumn arrived. Late August brought warm days, with chilly nights that demanded a good sleeping bag. We discovered a perfect campsite off a forestry track on the north side. A flat piece of ground overlooked the loch, with the farmhouse's faint lights barely visible in the distance. The silence was profound. Every water, ripple, and branch movement seemed amplified. After dinner, we sat by the water's edge, quiet and listening. Around 11 o'clock, when darkness had fully settled, Laura spotted something unusual. What started as a potential star reflection transformed into something extraordinary. A pale light that moved in ways no conventional aircraft could. My memory haunts me. That night at Loch 80 was unlike anything I've experienced before, and a yellow sphere about the size of a lantern hovered roughly 100 feet above the water's surface. Two more spheres gradually joined it, maintaining precise distances. These weren't typical aircraft blighties. They glowed steadily with a strange pulsing quality that made the water beneath shimmer. Silently moving across the loch, they performed an inexplicable dance. At one point, they lowered closer, creating mirror images, 3 spheres above, 3 reflecting below. After around 15 minutes, they rose higher and vanished without trace or sound. We returned to the test tent, mostly silent. That night, I lay awake, listening intently for unusual sounds. Nothing came, just occasional fish splashes and wind through heather. The next morning, while unzipping the tent, I noticed 2 men standing nearby. Their attire was bizarrely out of place in our remote wilderness setting. Dark suits, black ties, and crisp white shirts, neat and uncreased, as if they'd materialized from nowhere. Weeks later, a strange man approached me, asking peculiar questions about rotation. He seemed intensely interested in some specific detail, then suddenly disappeared. No one in the village ever mentioned seeing him, and I never saw him again. We were heading home after dinner at her sister's place in Oakage, traveling along dark back roads with trees and occasional pastures. It was early October, with a cool crispness in the air and an unusually clear sky. About halfway home near some farmland, Marissa spotted something first, a cluster of lights hovering low above a row of trees a couple 100 yards off the road. Initially, I thought it was a plane, but the pattern was on. These weren't blinking aircraft lights. They glowed steadily, 3 white and 1 red, arranged in a diamond shape. What struck me most was how unnaturally still they were. We slowed down and stopped on the shoulder to get a better look. The object hung silently in place. It wasn't like a helicopter. No rotor sound, no vibration in the air. Slowly, the light seemed to rotate and then drift sideways parallel to the road. Days later, we encountered something equally strange. 2 men appeared without warning or introduction. One was tall with very short, dark hair. The other had lighter hair. They asked us repeatedly if we'd heard hum. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The memory of those light spheres and those oddly dressed men remains vivid and unexplained. We were driving through the forest when everything changed. 2 men appeared out of nowhere, and our silence became heavy with unspoken tension. We'd been watching something unusual, a strange object that sat motionless before rising unnaturally fast and vanishing into the sky without a sound. Later that day, Laura noticed the sheep huddled tightly against the fence, as if distancing themselves from something unseen. We drove home, unable to discuss what we'd witnessed, feeling that speaking about it might somehow make things worse. When we turned onto our street, our headlights revealed 2 tall, thin men standing at our door. They were dressed in dark suits with skin so pale it looked almost grey. Unlike most people, they didn't turn to look at our car. Instead, they stood motionless, facing the front door like they'd been waiting. Marissa grabbed my arm. "Who are they?" she whispered. I pulled into the driveway slowly, my brain struggling to process what was happening. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd seen. We hadn't even discussed with each other, yet these two men were already waiting at our house. Before we could get out of the car, both men turned in perfect unison and started walking toward us. Their movements were stiff but deliberate, like an awkward imitation of human walking. I rolled the window down halfway as they approached. One leaned toward the window, his eyes impossibly dark, his expression unchanging. "Did you see it land?" he asked in a flat, mechanical voice. That was all. Marissa and I just stared. My heart raced. The way he phrased the question made my stomach twist as if they already knew exactly what we had witnessed. "No," Marissa finally answered quietly. The man stared at her, then straightened up. He glanced at his companion, who remained silent and still. We never camped at that site again. One detail haunted me. How absolutely certain those men had been that we'd heard a hum. We were sitting in the car, stunned into silence, after witnessing something inexplicable. The house felt different when we finally stepped outside. Empty, yet something lingered. The yard seemed quiet, but the silence was heavy. Sleep was impossible that night. Every tiny noise outside made us alert, listening intently. Around 3 a.m., I got up and double-checked all the locks. Everything was in place, but the atmosphere felt strange, as if we weren't alone. The next morning, I questioned our neighbors. No one had seen anything unusual on the street. I even drove up and down, scanning for any out-of-place vehicles. Nothing. What haunts me most is how precise their inquiry was. They didn't ask general questions like, "Did you see something?" Instead, they asked, "Did you see it land?" I felt like they already knew exactly what we'd witnessed and were just confirming our observation. Their departure with no car, no sound, no trace, remains completely inexplicable. The ferry ride from St. Speckable, the ferry ride from St. Edelbert. George's was meant to be routine. Late July with cool Atlantic air and a pale blue sky, everything seemed normal. Earlier that evening, I'd been on the eastern cliffs filming gulls and waves with my phone. That's when the lights appeared. Low over the water, maybe half a mile offshore, 3 white lights with a green tinge moved together as if connected. They weren't helicopters. There was no sound. As I watched, they shifted, splitting apart and reforming into a triangle. I filmed until the image became greeny. Then, suddenly, they vanished. Boarding the ferry, I noticed 2 men sitting near the rear cabin window. Dark suits, white shirts, black ties, unusual attire for a summer evening ferry. Their hats sat neatly beside them, perfectly still. They didn't speak to each other or anyone else. At first, I didn't think much about them, but something felt off. The ferry crossing was unlike anything I'd experienced before. As I walked near the gangway, I noticed 2 men who stood out immediately. They weren't like the other passengers. No scrolling, no glancing around, no shifting in their seats, just pure, unbroken staring. In other words, turned and walked down the driveway. Not hurried, not slow, just steady, like following a predetermined path. I thought they might have a car parked on the street, but when they reached the end of the drive, they didn't cross the road or head toward any vehicle. They just kept walking side by side until the darkness swallowed them past the streetlight. I was working my family's farm outside Stirlingshire, a quiet life of sheep and barley that had been mine since I could drive a tractor. The first odd thing occurred just after dusk on a Wednesday. I was splitting wood in the yard that afternoon when a black car rolled down our muddy lane. The car looked too polished for our rough track. 2 men stepped out, both tall, dressed in dark suits and hats that seemed out of place, too crisp and clean for our rural setting. Earlier that night, I'd noticed something unusual in the north pasture. At first, I thought it was moonlight, but these were 3 distinct lights hanging in a tight triangle above the field. They moved almost lazily, yet remained perfectly aligned. No sound, no engine noise, just an eerie glow moving silently overhead. The men looked odd. They were incredibly pale, like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. Their faces were smooth, almost waxy, and they blinked far less than normal. One spoke first with an accent I couldn't place. Not English, not Scottish. It wasn't a question, more a statement. I'd watched those lights for maybe 10 minutes before they suddenly rose in unison and shot away. On the ferry, these men were peculiar, both tall and pale, with dark hair combed straight back. Their skin looked almost unnaturally smooth, like someone had carefully airbrushed every detail. When I walked past their table, something felt off. The shorter one had hands folded perfectly still, long, thin fingers not moving an inch. I took a seat a few rows behind them, watching closely. They didn't blink. The woman with 2 kids walking to get snacks didn't even look their way. Nobody seemed to notice how strange they were. At one point, the taller one turned his head slightly. I could swear his lips formed a silent word. The other man tilted his head almost imperceptibly, as if listening to something nobody else could hear, and the ferry horn sounded near the dock. Both men straightened simultaneously like soldiers coming to attention. After we disembarked, I leaned on the pier pretending to tie my shoe. I watched the other passengers, fishermen, teenagers with bikes, couples, but these 2 men had vanished. I checked the ferry windows. Their booth was empty. No one was on deck. Later, I would review the grainy, shaky phone footage of strange lights. Those 2 men had appeared and disappeared so quickly, leaving nothing but questions. This happened during a grey autumn, the kind of damp chill that cuts through multiple layers. That night, sleep eluded me as I kept replaying the scene of something vanishing upward into the low clouds without a trace. By morning, I'd searched for a rational explanation and convinced myself it was some kind of military exercise. I called the nearby Air Force base to report what I'd seen. The man who answered was polite but brief, simply noting the time and location before saying, "Thank you, sir." Something felt off about the whole interaction. Later that week, something strange happened with the sheep. These men suddenly wanted to see my flock. I hesitated but felt compelled to comply. Their silent waiting presence made me uneasy. I led them across the yard and through the gate to the south paddock, where most of the sheep were grazing. They followed in complete silence, their shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. At the fence, the shorter one leaned against a post, staring intently at the sheep. The taller one turned to me and stated, "This is all of them." "Most," I answered, my voice small and uncertain. They nodded simultaneously in a slow, synchronized movement that made my stomach knot. Without another word, they turned and walked back to their car. I stood watching, unsure of what had just happened. It reminded me of another strange incident, that Tuesday in October when I walked home from school. The street looked ordinary enough. Mrs. Eck, now a day to Barrett, making the courses, and this was a stared me or Tagger's dog tied to the porch rail. Kids' bikes leaning against steps, cars parked nose to curb. The day felt cold, not biting but making my skin feel tight. I'd missed the bus after my algebra test ran longer than expected, so I decided to walk the half-mile home. I had my headphones in briefly, then took them out. I'm strange about wanting to hear the world when I'm alone. At first, it was just a light near the old water tower. One bulb that seemed to think it was a spotlight, but something was different. The light didn't sit on the power line pole. Instead, it hung in the air about 20 feet above the sidewalk, right past the library steps. A pale circle like a paper plate with a soft glow. No halo, no beam, just a steady disk. I stopped walking. My hands were tucked in my hoodie pockets, and my breath formed small clouds. The light was perfectly still. No flickering, no humming. The leaves didn't move when it shifted slightly to the left. As I followed the street, it followed me too, maintaining the same distance like a shadow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what happened. South Paddock had always been an easy place for herding sheep. At first, the animals followed my guidance toward the sheds without hesitation. But something changed. One night, they refused to move near the shed area. Instead, they bunched tightly at the gate, stamping their hooves and bleeding, completely resistant to my attempts to lead them. Forced to adapt, I redirected the flock to the smaller eastern field. Initially, I dismissed their behavior as typical animal unpredictability. Yet, the pattern persisted. Each subsequent night, they avoided the south paddock with an almost deliberate avoidance. Even during daylight hours, they would huddle at the far field's edge if they wandered near at all. A week later, I personally investigated the area. Walking the field carefully, I searched for any signs of disturbance. The grass appeared completely normal. No scorch marks, no broken fences, just the familiar pasture landscape. However, an inexplicable heaviness hung in the air, pressing down with an unsettling weight. Earlier that day, some men had been standing at the fence, gripping the wooden posts tightly. By the time I approached them, they were already driving away in their car, not once looking back. Since their departure, I haven't seen them again. The strange lights have vanished too, but the sheep's reluctance remains. They continue to refuse settlement in that field, as if sensing something I cannot comprehend. I arrived at school early. An overnight fog had settled, leaving the front steps slick and wet. Two men stood by the flagpole, the type you'd only encounter in movies about classified information. Their shoes were so meticulously polished, they reflected the concrete surface like mirrors. One of them locked eyes with me, giving the impression he'd been anticipating my arrival. With his companion, he approached and stopped, just a few feet away. The encounter didn't immediately register in my mind. One man bore a small scar on his cheek, and both carried a faint scent reminiscent of hospital-grade lemon cleaner. In those awkward moments, my brain did what brains typically do. I almost offered assistance. The taller man spoke first. "Good night. We're following up on an observation. Did the sphere follow you again last night?" His words hung heavily in the air. Sphere? I realized I hadn't mentioned a sphere to anyone, only a light. My tongue felt thick. People always advise honesty, but in that moment, being truthful seemed risky. The shorter man watched silently, observing without taking notes. His attention was so intense, it made my skin crawl. I could have lied. I could have walked away. Instead, I wanted to gauge their reaction, so I described what I'd seen. A pale light, almost white, with a blue tinge, moving slowly and then suddenly sliding to the curb. No sound. My phone had gone fuzzy when I tried to capture it on camera. They exchanged a glance, seemingly reading from a predetermined script. "Thank you," the tall one said. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing the observation. Keep to usual channels. Report any physiological symptoms." "Report to whom?" I asked. No answer came. The shorter man added a final instruction. "If it follows again, maintain distance. Do not attempt to interact." Then they vanished as quickly as they had appeared. Nobody at school seemed to notice their presence. The janitor continued sweeping. Miss Patel buzzed through the doors, operating on autopilot. Their visit felt like an invisible errand conducted in a visible space. I spent the day acting normal, answering questions, taking notes, but watching everything. The hallway light fixtures, the way fluorescent lights hummed differently when something felt off. At lunch, TJ mentioned a traffic accident. I claimed I hadn't seen the news. Later, he spoke about a strange translator error in a feed, and by the time the bell rang, something felt fundamentally wrong. That night, dozens of small thoughts rattled loose in my head, leaving me restless and unable to sleep. I noticed something strange. One humid August evening, near County Road 14, I pulled onto the gravel shoulder. Thick cornstalks towered around me, dark and imposing. 3 soft white lights hovered low over the cornfield. Not like planes or drones. They drifted and shifted subtly. In the days after the men's visit, background noises started feeling like signals. My phone's alarm blinked a minute early before correcting itself. The school security camera facing the parking lot captured a morning clip where 2 frames suddenly showed only static before resuming normally. Maya, who sits behind me in history, claimed she didn't remember me telling Mr. Tomey tolling Mr. Stand. Event Mr. Aptism taper something about a harvest. Even though I'd explicitly mentioned it 3 times that morning, facts seemed to be sliding in and out of place. A week later, on a rainy Thursday, I was called to the office. I expected trouble for something trivial, like texting or skipping the locker. Instead, the principal asked me to sit. The 2 men were there again, seated in folding chairs, as if they'd always been part of the scene. The taller one wore the same thin smile. "We just want to ensure you're coping," the principal said. They asked about headaches, sleep issues, dizziness. I mentioned feeling tired and jumpy, carefully avoiding any reference to that second night I'd gone out. My hands trembled when reaching for a pen. The men didn't ask about the photos on my phone or the route I'd walked. They simply nodded, left, and the principal advised me to visit the nurse if needed. I tried to move on. I ran errands for, my mom did homework, went to soccer practice, normal things, but the light kept visiting my thoughts. On the 3rd night after their school conversation, I woke to a car door sound and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The porch light was on, but no one was there when I pulled back the curtains. The next morning, silence felt like someone had stolen away an entire chorus of birds. I never saw the men again, not in person. Twice I spotted a black sedan. I was out walking, hands in my pockets, looking up at the sky. The asphalt in the neighbor's grill scented the air. No lights, no disturbance. Gus, Mrs. Esten's, Ortega's dog trotted by with his owner, giving me a look that suggested I should be inside, where people typically stay after dark. I went home and left the porch light on anyway. The night sky glowed a dull orange with scattered stars barely visible against the distant town's illumination. I killed the headlights and parked, setting my camera on the hood to capture different exposures. Through my camera's viewfinder, the lights appeared sharper and more intense than they did with my naked eye. I snapped about a dozen photographs, noticing at one point how the lights mysteriously faded and then reappeared in an entirely different position. Insects buzzed softly in the background. I kept this experience to myself, knowing people would either elevate me to hero status or dismiss me as a liar. Strange how ordinary moments become intertwined with such events. Afterward, I found myself checking my phone camera more frequently, not to gather proof, but to feel a sense of security. My walking pace quickened slightly, and across walks, a tiny spark of panic would flicker momentarily whenever a nearby light blinked. Life continued its steady rhythm. Classes changed, seasons shifted. Those lights never followed me after that first encounter. Perhaps they had achieved their unknown purpose. Or perhaps they wanted nothing at all. The men in suits never returned, never sent a letter, never made contact. The school janitor continued sweeping floors. My phone's camera still captures grainy sky images. Sometimes the strange isn't about dramatic mythic moments, but about the subtle enrollment of small details afterwards. A blank security file frame, a neighbor's dog that no longer barks in its usual way. These minor anomalies made me watch the sky longer than I probably should have. I now lock my door twice each night, a habit maintained ever since. Power lines buzzed faintly along the road, creating an atmosphere that was strange yet not threatening. Suddenly, the lights blinked out completely. After waiting a while, I prepared to head home. That's when they appeared. Two men stood by my car's rear near the trunk. Their appearance was striking: black suits, white shirts, and black ties that looked like winter funeral attire. Neither seemed affected by the heat. One was significantly taller than me, at least half a foot, while the other was only slightly shorter. Their black shoes remained impeccably clean despite the dusty gravel. I hadn't heard them approach. One moment I was adjusting camera settings, and the next they were simply there. "Evening, ma'am," the taller one said in a low, even voice. Now, here's the rewritten version. Late November, darkness fell early in my small one-story house on the edge of a farming town in upstate New York. The kind of quiet place where everyone knows each other. I work at the feed store. Nothing exciting. 2 nights earlier, while stacking wood behind the house, I spotted something strange in the sky. 3 dull orange lights moving in a slow triangle, completely silent. They passed overhead, stopped briefly, then shot east faster than anything I've ever seen. I didn't tell anyone. Not my neighbors, not my co-workers. I didn't even take out my phone. That Friday night, watching TV with the dog at my feet, someone knocked on the front door. These weren't quick taps, but 3 steady knocks. Nobody drops by out here without calling first, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a tall, pale man in a black suit stood on the porch. His white shirt and black tie looked formal, and his polished dress shoes seemed absurdly out of place on a muddy farm road. He didn't smile or introduce himself. Their words barely carried across the open field. "We'd like to see them." I gripped the camera tighter and asked who they were. They didn't respond. The shorter one repeated the exact same line word for word as if reading from a script. Their delivery was unnervingly uniform. No accent, no emotion. When I asked why, they stared silently for a full 5 seconds. Their faces were pale but not sickly, impossibly smooth in a way that made determining their age difficult. Dark hair was parted precisely on the side, cut short like in an old photograph. Finally, the taller one spoke, his lips barely moving. To verify, I stepped back toward the driver's door, declaring I wouldn't hand over my camera. Simultaneously, they both smiled an identical rehearsed expression with a small upturn at the corners, revealing perfectly even teeth. Without another word, they turned at the exact same moment and began walking down the road away from me. No car, no flashlight, just black suits and pale faces in the humid darkness. Their shoes crunched on the gravel for a few seconds before falling silent. When I looked up, they had vanished. The road stretched long and straight with no possible turn-off. Shaking, I got into the car and locked the doors. My hands trembled so much that I dropped. The camera on, the passenger seat. As I drove back to town, the radio dissolved into static for about a mile. Checking the rear view mirror after a night shoot, I saw only an empty road. Back home, I loaded the photos from my camera. At first, everything looked normal. Dim shapes of the cornfield with some faint glows where lights had been. But halfway through the sequence, something changed. One shot revealed two men standing in the cornfield between the rows facing the camera. They were blurry but unmistakable. Black suits among the cornstalks looking straight at me. I hadn't seen anyone while shooting. No movement, no rustling leaves. In the next shot, they were gone. Just empty rows of corn. I shut the laptop and walked around my house, turning on every light. It was after midnight. Outside, only crickets broke the silence. 2 days later, at the grocery store, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was my own photo zoomed in on the two men's faces. No message, no caption. When I got home, the camera battery was dead, though it had been full the night before. Memory card was missing, and I knew I hadn't removed it. I've replaced my lock since then and still go out on shoots, but never alone and never near that cornfield. Then he arrived. Good evening. May I come inside to ask a few questions? No introduction, no badge, no warmth. I was busy and asked what this was about. He tilted his head slightly, almost bird-like, and stated precisely that he was gathering information about aerial phenomena observed from my property on November 23rd at 6:37 p.m. The exactness of the time caught my attention immediately. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen. Not a single person, not even written it down anywhere. How do you know? He didn't respond, simply repeating, "We're gathering information." His appearance was unsettling. Old grey paper, thin, colourless lips, eyes incredibly dark. So dark that pupils and irises blended together, and he didn't blink, not once. Standing in the drizzling evening with my porch light buzzing overhead, he began asking extraordinary specific questions. Describe the light's arrangement, describe their travel direction relative to true north, describe any sound level or electromagnetic interference changes. He used the phrase electromagnetic interference as if reading from a script. I gave short answers, mostly hoping he'd leave. 3 lights moving east, silent, nothing else. When I said nothing else, he tilted his head again and stared at me intensely, a blank yet penetrating look, seemingly waiting for me to elaborate or correct myself, and I closed the door, my heart racing after the brief encounter. The entire interaction had lasted maybe 3 minutes. In the living room with my dog nearby, I tried to calm down. Moments later, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check where the mysterious visitor had gone. Maybe I could catch a license plate. When I reopened the door, the porch was empty. The gravel driveway showed no trace, no car, no footprints in the wet ground. The drizzle continued. Later that evening, I was driving home on Route 9, the stretch that runs past Miller's Farm with its broken fence and square barn. Around 10:30, the rain had eased to a steady mist that made the road glisten. I'd been glancing at the GPS, my mind wandering, when a pale light appeared over the field to my right, just above the crop dogs. At first, I thought someone had left a tractor light on, but it hung motionless. No beams swept across the field, just a soft white glow like a porch lantern floating 10 or 12 feet off the ground. I did what most people do. I slowed and then stopped on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in. The drizzle. Car went quiet except for the wipers. The light remained steady, not pulsing, making no sound. Back home, something felt off. My dog was whining softly. He almost never does that. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the road, scanning about a 1/4 mile in both directions. With the drizzle and my porch light behind me, I should have been able to see a tail light, or at least a dark shape moving away. Nothing, just the sound of rain on leaves. An hour later, while making tea, I noticed something peculiar. When the man had been standing on my porch, I never heard rain on his coat. Mine was soaked after just a minute outside. He didn't have an umbrella, yet there were no beads of water on his shoulders. His leather shoes remained polished and spotless. The next morning, I checked my old motion-activated security camera over the garage. It records short clips whenever someone approaches the driveway. There was nothing from that night. No car pulling in, no person walking up, no one leaving, just the normal empty driveway. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say that some guy in a suit knew something, appeared mysteriously, and left no trace? Here is the rewritten text. Something strange happened that night on a desolate road. What started as what I thought might be a farm equipment prank quickly became something more unsettling. 3 lights appeared in the sky, moving in a way no aircraft should, sliding sideways about 30 yards before stopping completely. My radio erupted into static. First a faint buzz, then pure white noise drowning out the local station. The dashboard clock blinked to 0 before resetting to the correct time. I tried taking pictures, but my phone captured nothing, just smears where light should have been. When the lights vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared, I drove on with slightly shaking hands. The field looked ordinary under my headlights, but the road felt unnervingly empty. No trucks, no other cars, not even crows on the fence. The world had shrunk to something tight and confined. A week later, a letter arrived in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single piece of white paper with words typed precisely, "Thank you for your cooperation." I didn't keep the letter. I burned it. Since then, strange encounters continued. The next morning, a black sedan appeared 2 houses down, parked under the sycamores. It looked pristine. No rust, no bumper stickers with a license plate that didn't trigger recognition. Sometimes the driver's seat looked empty. Sometimes a shadowy figure occupied the passenger side. I didn't approach it. On the 3rd day's midpoint, I watched it pull away when heading to the hardware store. Its movement was unremarkable, just enough to turn the corner and disappear. Now, if a car slows down near my place, I find myself turning off the lights and waiting until it passes. Now I noticed something odd while tracking its movement. I was maintaining a steady pace half a block behind the delivery truck and never exceeded the speed limit. When the truck turned, the sedan smoothly eased into the space left behind. I dismissed it as mere coincidence and went about my day. That evening, during the rain, I saw the car again at the end of the cul-de-sac. I'd been to this diner on Pine Street before. The kind of place that keeps coffee brewing all night and displays a board claiming pie is fresh. Even at 2 a.m. I parked and went inside for a hash brown. When I emerged, the black car was closer, idling by the pump. The driver's side was tinted so dark you couldn't tell if anyone was inside. Over 2 days, the car kept appearing in little ways. At the grocery near the library, parked where it didn't belong in the church lot. Each time I caught sight of it, that small tightness returned, like the skin between my shoulder blades had been pinched and held. I mentioned to a work friend that I thought someone might be following me. He joked about the UFO guy last month, and his laugh didn't reach his eyes. He suggested calling the police if I was sure, but I didn't follow up. That Friday night, unable to sit in my dark apartment, staring at the street, I stopped at the diner. Inside it was warm with fluorescent lights almost too bright. An old man ate beans at the counter. Ellie, the waitress who knew me by sight, brought coffee without asking. I took the booth by the window to watch the parking lot. The black car was there, as expected, parked far enough away that no one noticed. Right at the edge of the street lamp, halfway through my sandwich, the doorbell chimed. 2 men in black suits walked in, not just dark jackets and slacks, but those old flat lapel suits that seemed from another decade. Plain white shirts, dark ties, clean shoes. They moved with purpose, taking brisk, economical steps that wasted no motion. One had ash-gold hair combed straight back. The other had a crease at the corner of his mouth, like he didn't mind saying uncomfortable things. Both had that placid city look people get after a long day inside. They came straight to my booth. "Excuse me," the taller one said flatly. "Are you feeling well since the event?" For a moment I thought he was joking, I responded. "What event?" As if I didn't know what he meant. I didn't tell anyone about the lights, not even Ellie. The atmosphere in the diner shifted as 2 men approached my table. One was tall, with eyes unnervingly calm and unblinking. The other blinked, but it seemed calculated, deliberate. A faint scent of aftershave and rain surrounded them, and the air grew colder. I laughed nervously. That uncomfortable chuckle people make when uncertainty takes hold. "The lights over Miller's Field," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I didn't elaborate. Saying it out loud might make it real. "Good," the tall man responded, his words clipped like bullet points. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing details. Keep your frequency normal. We will monitor." I asked, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. The diner had gone completely silent. An old man's fork hung suspended mid-air. Ellie stared down at the register, her order pad forgotten. The shorter man placed a finger on the table as if marking an invisible boundary. "We are checking for adverse effects," he said. "You reported no auditory disturbances." They glanced at me, then simultaneously tilted their heads at the exact same angle. Their smiles, the tall one's smile that didn't reach his eyes, the shorter one's precisely matching expression were identical. "I haven't said anything," I said sharply. "Good," they responded in unison. The tall one added, "Keep to your schedule. Maintain social contacts. Do not conduct experiments." The words hung heavily. I couldn't remember planning any experiments. As a courier, I wasn't someone who set up cameras in fields. Their language was clinical, like a nurse, checking medication compliance. These weren't police or local officials. This wasn't a routine checkup. Around me, the diner's atmosphere had transformed. The old man lowered his fork. A woman by the pie case turned pale. A young cook in a baseball cap concentrated intensely on flipping eggs, as if his focus could make these strange men vanish. They stood there for maybe 2 minutes before turning and walking to the door with the same slow, economical pace. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw their black car, headlights off, glass tinted. They stepped into the mist and reached the vehicle in just a few strides. The tall one opened the door, and then they were gone. The black car had barely left when I started replaying everything that happened. 2 men, no introductions, just a procedural interaction that felt more like closing a file than a confrontation. A waitress approached, her voice slightly too bright. I left a $10 bill on the table and walked out without finishing my coffee. Outside, rain was falling under streetlights. The men weren't violent, and they weren't threatening in the way someone with a weapon might be. I thought about their cryptic words and the strange instruction to avoid sharing details. That night, every light in my apartment stayed on. I stared at the door, half expecting a soft knock or the squeak of tires. The water by my bed tasted metallic. Sleep came in fragments. I started waking earlier than usual, as if anticipating an unscheduled appointment. The black car appeared less frequently, but when it did, I felt a sense of impending something in my gut, like a countdown approaching 0. I glimpsed the men once more at a gas station, reflected in pumped glass, black suits, pale faces moving past. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. Their presence was the message. I haven't told the police. I shared the story with Aaron, who writes obituaries and turns everything into a potential joke. He suggested ignoring it, treating it like a weird couple of nights. Interestingly, his lack of detailed questions made me share more. The next day, he recommended writing everything down. So I did, longhand in a notebook now sitting on my kitchen table. The pages are filled with timestamps, descriptions of their synchronized smiles, details about the car, the rain, the diner's coffee smell. I keep driving past Miller's Field, parking on the shoulder, staring into darkness. I'm searching for that light again, wanting proof, wanting to explain this to myself in one coherent sentence. Daylight reveals a Benner landscape. Need cornrows, broken fence I've meant to report. But at dusk, there's sometimes an unexplainable glow on the horizon, something my camera can't capture. Now, when I lock my front door at night, I do it twice. I check the people repeatedly. Something has changed, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The black car reduced my world to the size of a curtain's edge. Deliveries done. I'd sit in the diner eating a solitary late sandwich. Nobody inquired about my health anymore. The men didn't need to threaten me. Their check-ins were procedural. A file closed with mechanical precision. No warmth, just pure routine. Midnight found me posting a photo from the harbor road, tide low and quiet. 3 lights hung over the horizon, nutwater hanging like delicate lamps above the bay. I'd stopped my car, climbed the brake wall, and snapped a few shots with my phone. What my screen showed was clearer than what my eyes could see. 3 white dots forming an uneven triangle, sometimes wobbling, sometimes steady. My upload to the town's Facebook group was simple. We had lights over the bay. Anyone else seeing this? The group typically buzzed with mundane updates. Crab recipes and lost dog notices. I didn't expect much response. Distant gull sounds and harbor hums seeped through my cracked window as I drifted off to sleep. Tuesday morning arrived like any other. I worked the early shift at Anchor and Elm, serving coffee and sandwiches to pre-dawn regulars. Soft grey fog made lamps glow like moons. My post gathered minimal engagement, just a boat sale advertisement and a casual wow, nothing urgent comment. Around 8 a.m., an older man in a wool coat settled at the corner table. More customers trickled in. By 9 o'clock, when the morning rush settled into its steady rhythm, they appeared. 2 men in black suits, the kind Hollywood depicts in government films. No badges, no identification. Their movement wasn't like locals or tourists, but calculated and precise. Heels set, shoulders rigid. They stopped exactly at my service counter, mid-muffin stack and coffee pour. No order, no small talk. Just 2 black silhouettes in the misty light. At first they seemed ordinary enough. Clean suits, short hair, the taller one with a fade, the shorter with a narrow jaw. Something felt off. Standing over the counter, they stared directly at me without blinking. Not once. Initially, I thought they were just intensely focused on the pastry case. But the taller one's head tilted slightly, his eyes tracking me like an animal watching movement. He wasn't chewing, wasn't breathing heavily. He simply existed. They remained motionless for what felt like 15 minutes. Despite the busy cafe, the register line seemed unusually quiet. People would glance over, then returned their coffees as if nothing strange was happening. I continued making sandwiches, taking payments, while these 2 men stood like stationary figures someone had deliberately placed. Regulars behaved bizarrely. Pete, who always orders his sausage and egg at 9:30, would look up and smile as if everything was normal. A woman with a stroller sat nearby, scrolled through her phone, then left without incident. My hands trembled slightly as I wiped the counter, hyper-aware of the 2 men who had been standing motionless for at least 15 minutes. No newspapers read, no casual movements, just their precise, calculated presence that felt like a carefully choreographed scene. The shorter and taller men carried themselves with an unmistakable authority, shoulders slightly forward, chins set. They examined me thoroughly. I felt increasingly uncomfortable, unsure why I couldn't bring myself to ask if they needed anything. Eventually, I managed a simple question. "Can I help you fellas with anything?" The shorter one turned his head marginally, almost imperceptibly. No real facial movement, no sound. The taller one nodded as if that answered everything. His first words came flat and measured like a recorded message. Everything all right. The question landed heavily, not because of its content, but because it came from someone who'd been watching me without blinking. I answered reflexively, yes. Everything was fine. Then I wondered why I was even responding. The shorter man cut straight to the point. "Have you slept since the event?" He continued without pause, asking about headaches, earring, disrupted appetite. The word event made the coffee in my hand feel suddenly sharp and acidic. I hadn't told anyone. Not my mother, not my boss, not even the online group where I'd half-jokingly mentioned the lights. I'd only posted a few pictures with minimal response. When I explained I'd seen lights over the bay and photographed them, it felt uncomfortably close to a confession. They listened, expressionless. The taller one instructed, "Continue routine. Avoid sharing details. Consult your physician if symptoms worsen." He placed a folded newspaper on the counter between us, leaving behind a single small rectangle of embossed ink resembling a barcode. The diner fell silent. That specific quiet that descends when significant conversation happens. Someone dropped a tray in the background, creating a momentary sound before silence returned. The 2 men straightened, signaling their imminent departure. They left exactly as they'd arrived, without touching the door, without drawing attention. Through the bell and into the fog, they vanished. Nights flickered over the bay and something felt off. At the cafe, people moved in usual patterns, but the atmosphere was strange. 2 men had been standing by the counter earlier, though no camera footage captured them clearly. I'd noticed something peculiar in my photos. My favorite shot of 3 lights over the water revealed 2 dark shapes just beyond the shoreline, like telephone poles, barely visible. Zooming in showed 2 figures exactly where the men had been that morning. One taller with hands forward, the other shorter with a tilted head. When I mentioned this to people at the cafe, reactions were mixed. The hat-wearing man claimed he'd seen nothing. Ellie at the register, who'd worked mornings for 6 years, suggested I might be overtired. "You've got a lot going on," she said softly. "Maybe you're just jumpy," Pete said. He'd been on his phone. The woman with the stroller recalled nothing of our encounter. Someone from the town's Facebook group sent a private message after I posted the photo, asking if I was okay. By noon, Harbour Patrol was investigating reports about lights. I texted back that everything at the cafe was fine and tried to focus on making sandwiches. That night, I rode the late bus home under a clearing sky. The fog lifted, lights over the bay vanished. My roommate's friends were loud, but I couldn't settle. At 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and found the kitchen dark. My phone lit up with a mysterious notification. A direct message from an unrecognizable user contained only the photo I'd taken of the three lights. The timestamp predated my original post. No username, no caption. I stared at the little card, noticing a dull rectangle where ink had been pressed into the paper. In the following days, I expected something to happen. I waited to be questioned, told to stop posting, or given instructions. I drove past the harbour, scanning the water and sky for anything unusual. Sometimes a black car would appear, adding to the growing mystery. Known down by the harbour, something felt off when I looked twice. My phone would glitch, freezing the camera app and showing a still from earlier, like I was stuck on yesterday. The cafe's security system logged a temporary fault during a 10-second stretch at 9:15, where the video feed pixelated and returned without audio. We replaced the cable, and nothing else happened. When I brought up the lights, people at the shop changed the subject and joked about late-night lighthouse spotting, passing me a bite of muffin. Later that week, I checked the Facebook thread and found the original post had been taken down. A moderator sent me a private note explaining that posts sometimes get flagged and removed. No one else remembered seeing the two women in the shop. The wall camera footage just showed people moving, talking, and steaming milk. The supposed tableau of two women in black didn't appear except in my photo. I went home each night and locked the door, sleeping with the light on because it felt like the reasonable thing to do. The two women didn't come back. Lights over the bay were reported here and there for a couple weeks. Then, nobody talked about them anymore. My photos sat in my camera roll, a small piece of evidence that looked like a trick. I stopped posting to that group and told my roommate a toned-down version. I had a weird morning, that was all. Sometimes while washing dishes, I would find myself watching the street long after everyone else had gone to bed. When the fog came in off the water, I'd step outside, breathe the cold, damp, and check how the light hit the harbour just in case. There was nothing dramatic. No knock at my door. No late-night visits from suits. Just the regular world. My manager joked that maybe the city needed me to be their official weather reporter. I laughed and went back to work, keeping on pouring coffee outwardly. Nothing changed. I kept counting days and maintaining my routines, but internally something was different. I knew a shape the way you know the shape of a bruise. It wasn't obvious at first, but you can't unknow it. The two women had lingered by the counter, asked their questions without really asking, and left as if they had never been there at all. I kept the photo on my phone. Every so often, I open it and stare at the background until the image blurs, hoping for some answer to step out of the grey. And here's the rewritten text. My grandparents' land stretches across 3 fields with an old red barn and a row of sagging cottonwoods. Nothing remarkable, just our quiet home. That night, the July heat hung thick and heavy. Rex, our lab, wandered near the back porch while I lit the last mosquito coil. Claire and I at the kitchen window open, desperate for any hint of a breeze. Suddenly, the hen house went completely silent. At first, I suspected a fox might be prowling, but then I noticed something stranger. Every single bird had frozen like someone hit pause on a video. A slow light began moving across the field. This wasn't like anything we'd seen before. No airplane, no strobes, just a single pale disc hovering low, carefully watching against the cottonwoods. I could tell it was about the height of telephone poles. It drifted deliberately from the east hedgerow toward the pond, gliding without a sound. Only a faint change in the grass and a cool glow sliding past like a painter's torch revealed its movement. Instinctively, I grabbed my camera. The photos were useless, just washed out dots against blackness. Claire came out in her slippers, leaned on my shoulder, and muttered, "What the hell?" Rex sat by the fence, unusually calm, watching with the focused attention dogs get when spotting a kite. We observed the Tesla light drift past the pond and over the woodlot, then vanish into darkness like a light being tucked into someone's pocket. We didn't call anyone who would believe us. The sheriff would probably laugh us off. Strange things kept happening afterward. The next morning, my pickup's battery was dead, though I'd left no lights on. At noon, my radio caught a split second of static odd, since reception is usually perfect. Flair's watch lost 5 minutes during the afternoon, then mysteriously found them an hour later. The hens refused to go near the east hedge, clustering tightly along the coupe. Grandma Ellen, who's lived here 50 years, just shook her head when we told her. Weather can turn thick and still, creating conditions where odd things seem to happen almost naturally. Claire had mentioned a dream about voices in the grass, laughing it off over coffee, but keeping her purse close. The game camera by the pond held something unsettling. 6 seconds of black, then static, then 6 more seconds of black. No image at all. The timestamp read 2 a.m., which didn't quite match when the hens went quiet or when the light had passed. He stood on the porch, an unexpected visitor who seemed more downtown office than Gravel Farm Drive. When I opened the door, wiping my hands on a towel, his first words were direct. "Evening. I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a glass of water before we discussed last night?" Something felt strange about how he spoke, as if our discussion was anticipated. Not surprising. Behind me, Claire watched from the kitchen island. Grandma Ellen rocked in her chair, knitting needles clicking softly. The dog gave a single sharp bark. His unusual face caught my attention first. Eyes an indeterminate color, not quite brown, not quite gray, and he didn't blink while speaking. I handed him water from the tap, which he took politely. His fingers wrapped around the glass with practiced precision, though he never actually drank. When I realized this, I felt oddly foolish. "You okay?" I asked. He set the glass down and responded in a precise, economical voice. "Now, would you describe what you observed? No notepad, no phone, no request for footage as to direct request and patient waiting. So?" I told him everything about the pale disk hovering over the pond, how it slid into the trees and vanished, how the fence had frozen. Rex sitting watching the camera by the post, capturing only a blank clip at 0212 a.m. Claire mentioned her watch losing time. Grandma Ellen spoke of her dream. He nodded after each detail, as if cataloguing information in some internal system. We didn't talk much about the light. Claire put away dishes mechanically, pausing midway to rub her palms together, a telltale sign she was trying to stop thinking about something. "Maybe we should call somebody," she said, "just to have it on record." I agreed we would handle it the next day, which felt safer than immediate action, and he stood delicately, balancing 2 fingers on the glass rim, and walked off the porch down the drive through the next gate toward the pond. Between the trees, he moved like someone navigating a familiar hallway. Within 30 yards, the light through the leaves absorbed him completely. He vanished. We remained motionless. Claire had dropped her dish towel. Grandma's knitting slipped from her hands. Rex flattened his ears and whined softly. The untouched glass sat on the porch rail. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Corn shimmered. Crickets awakened. Darkness settled. Bear went to get a glass and poured it down the sink. Nothing remained. No drops spilled or evaporated as might happen with an open container on a breezy summer day. The glass looked untouched, dry, and cool. When I ran my fingers inside, no trace of water existed. No hint of mineral rings on the edges. Walking the path to the gate revealed no disturbance. The grass stood undisturbed with no footprints suggesting anyone had been here. That night, we sat with closed windows and the porch light on, sleep coming fitfully. We knew farms, knew coyotes and storms, understood the small dangers that roam fields. But this felt different. Mornings brought strange occurrences. The coupe door would be shut, though I'd left it open. My pickup's tailgate would be locked when I'd left it down. At noon, the shop radio cut to static for 2 seconds, regardless of station. Grandma Ellen started leaving her porch light on until I asked her to stop. I kept the hens close to the yard and let Bren sleep better. The suited man never returned. No car ever parked on the road that might match him or his description. The glass remained suspicious until I finally tucked it away in the cupboard with other dishes, trying to treat it like something ordinary. Sometimes I look at that cupboard and think of frozen hens, of a quiet field where a single light moved like a hand sweeping velvet, of how the man's tongue didn't move when he spoke, of how he left a full glass of water untouched. I don't call this an event or a visitation. I'm not spinning tales about UFOs or hidden worlds. The story begins with a shared experience of mystery. Seasons pass with hens pecking near the hedge, and some nights I still glance at the pond. I was on the roadside, engine running, when the first car passed, seemingly oblivious. Near midnight, the rain had softened, making highway lights smear. Returning from a job in the next county, I was driving down a stretch of highway where white lines and occasional diner signs were my only companions. Suddenly, my headlights shifted from a normal dim yellow to a bright blue in an instant. Other drivers continued speeding past unaffected. To the east, a light caught my attention. At first, it seemed like a construction sign, but something was different. Hovering about 100 feet above the guardrail, it was motionless and soft, like an abandoned lamp suspended in midair. Shaking, I pulled over and killed the engine. Rain hissed softly on the hood, while my phone showed no signal. I didn't attempt to film. That would have felt like admitting fear. Instead, I watched. Cars continued passing beneath the light, close enough to flag down, but nobody stopped. It seemed as if vehicles were moving around something invisible, unnoticed. The light was a clean disc, a pale color I couldn't immediately categorize. Later, when I tried describing it in my phone's notes, soft white with a blue wash felt inadequate. The radio suddenly erupted into static, not a gradual fade, but an abrupt white roar, as if disconnected from any rational source. My dashboard clock blinked 0 momentarily before resetting, and the digital thermometer flickered 2 days before returning to normal. A truck passed 2 lanes away. The driver stared straight ahead, mouth moving, possibly speaking to a passenger. He didn't slow down. The light then slid sideways, not sharply, but like an object being gently nudged across a surface. The air felt different, not from wind or pressure, but as if someone had drawn an invisible curtain around me. I oddly recalled a pot of coffee left on a burner, how its aroma lingers and fills a space. I pulled up to the pump, needing gas and a moment to process what I'd just witnessed. This is how mysteries find us. Unexpected, unexplained, leaving us with more questions than answers. Not coffee after a strange night on the highway. The gas station felt like my only shelter from the eerie stillness I just experienced. 2 men stood at the counter, completely out of place. Their dark suits and polished shoes looking like they'd stepped out of a downtown office, not a roadside stop. Marco, a kid I knew from a previous job, waved me toward pump 3. Inside the convenience store, diesel and peppermint gum hung in the air under harsh fluorescent lights. One man was tall with a square jaw, the other shorter with a thin nose and a close-shaved beard. They were unnaturally still, positioned near the cooler, but not buying anything. When the doorbell rang, they both turned in perfect synchronization. Small details caught my eye. The taller man's slightly misaligned tie, a tiny scuff on the shorter man's right shoe. Their gaze locked onto me, and after my odd night on the highway, I felt like prey. "Sir," the tall one spoke, his voice completely neutral. "You were on Route 47 earlier this evening, were you not?" It wasn't really a question. Something about how he knew the route made me uneasy. I nodded. "Headed back from the mill," he continued. "Did you observe any aerial lights approximately 8 miles east of the bridge?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "I did. Earlier driving home, I'd been cautious. The highway had shown me something strange, a light that winked out instantly like a photograph snatched from the sky. No sound followed, no echo, just darkness with distant truck tail lights ghosting across my dashboard. The shorter man studied his hands, then looked up with a gaze that made me read his expression twice. It wasn't anger or friendliness, just pure puzzlement. "Describe the exact color of the lights," he demanded. Colors can be tricky, especially when recalling something from a nighttime encounter. I thought about how the light appeared, pale like the inside of an overcast day, but with a coolness that made its edges shift toward blue. When I blinked, I described it exactly. A soft white with a blue wash. More blue than H halogen, yet softer than neon. Like the blue you'd see in a pale winter window. Clean but not electric. Their exchange was lightning quick. A subtle tightening at the corner of the taller man's mouth, the shorter one tilting his head as if mishearing something. The moment lasted less than a second, but felt pivotal. Not he stared at me, his face going blank. For the first time, our eyes fully met, and I caught a glimpse of confusion. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, causing Marco at the register look up from bagging chips, They left exactly as they'd arrived, through the glass door, buying nothing, not even touching the pumps. Walking into the rain, they moved like men with a precise destination. I watched them go, expecting them to enter a car, but no vehicle sat in the station lot. For a moment, I imagined they ducked behind a truck, but no vehicle could hide two grown men without a sound. I paid for my coffee with cash. My card felt too slow, and Marco didn't ask for a receipt. Outside, the rain intensified, streetlights blooming into halos. I fumbled my car keys, feeling disoriented as the engine started. Coffee's aroma filled the car while I watched the station's edge. 10 minutes later, a black sedan rolled slowly past the pump islands and eased down a side street. I watched, half hoping they'd stop, but the car continued on, driving home with low headlights and the radio at a polite volume. I didn't want the static to return. Outwardly, things went back to normal. I worked, drove county roads, mowed the yard, but inside, everything felt quieter. Small glitches became more noticeable. The oven clock would blink once at 2:12 a.m. and correct itself. My phone would flash a temporary loss of carrier while on hold. The electrical hum in the house took a soft skip. Once, while making dinner, I realized I'd been standing in the kitchen for 6 minutes, staring out the window with no idea what had occupied my brain. These little skips made me watch the edge of my life carefully. For 3 mornings after that encounter, I kept replaying the color question in my head. It was logically an odd thing to ask. People who study lights might want exit data or wavelengths, but an anonymous citizen asking about a shade of blue. That's something a journalist might bring up, not two men in suits at a gas station. I told Marco the story the next time I went in for gas, partly to hear it out loud, and checked my own memory against his face. He shrugged like the sensible city kid he was, mentioning he'd seen a car pull through the lot that night, black and clean, but hadn't thought to pay much attention. He didn't remember two men at the counter. Maybe they were just some weirdos. When we went to Clear Pond for a weekend trip, the 5 of us, me, Alex, Maya, Brent, Lena, and Omar, set up a couple of tents on the ridge above the water and built a fire pit down by the shore. It had rained in the afternoon, and then the clouds thinned enough to leave that bright, hard summer sky that comes with low humidity. We'd eaten hot dogs, thrown a frisbee that kept getting blown off course, and then sat in a ring around the fire with our headlamp beams off, just listening. Around 11 o'clock, when the bugs had gone quiet, and Brent was telling a story about a raccoon in his neighbor's trash, things felt a little smaller and slower than usual. You notice the cadence of the night when you're not in a city. The frogs across the water had their own rhythm. The fire crackled. Then Maya, leaning back on her elbows with her face turned toward the lake, said, "Hey, do you see that?" At first I thought she meant the moon, that the moon was where it always was. About 100 yards out over the pond, there were 3 pale lights, not very bright, hanging maybe 20 feet above the surface. They moved together slowly, like someone had 3 lanterns on cables and was walking them across the water. Except there was no boat, no rope, no sound. They drifted a little, paused, then slid sideways in perfect unison. A week later, walking to the car, I noticed a small, folded scrap of paper on the bumper of a pickup across the lot. I picked it up. It was a receipt from the gas station, printed at 11:43 p.m. The timestamp matched the hour of the lights. On the back of the receipt, someone had scrawled in neat block letters, color, and beneath it a single letter B. I folded the paper into my pocket and drove home. I thought about calling someone to say what I had seen. The county office, the local paper, a blog. That every time I tried to form the call in my mouth, it sounded like a small private thing, like gossip you tell over the fence. When I did tell one friend, Cassia, she listened and said, "You were precise. Keep it that way." She's a nurse, and she still sounded like she wanted to advise. "But the suit's getting coffee," he said, and I sounded like he was guessing more than remembering. I suppose what lingered afterward wasn't the men's question or the look they exchanged. Here's the rewritten text. Our camping trip felt different after that night. 5 of us sat around the fire, marshmallow sticks forgotten, staring at something we couldn't explain. Lights flickered in the distance, unlike anything we'd seen before. Marco kept the coffee warm while we tried to make sense of what we'd witnessed. The highway continued its steady stream of traffic, indifferent to our confusion. Lena suggested they might be drone hobbyists from weekend campers near the inlet, but none of our theories seemed to fit. The lights behaved strangely. They didn't flicker like LEDs or blink like navigation markers. More peculiar was how undisturbed the surrounding nature remained. Frogs kept up their chorus. Ducks didn't fly. Not a single wave stirred. After 20 minutes, the lights faded as if someone was slowly turning down a dimmer switch. We lingered, half expecting them to reappear. Conversation dissolved into hesitant fragments. Exhaustion crept in and we retreated to our tents, following our usual routine, brushing teeth, setting boat launch alarms, checking the cooler. Sleep came fitfully that night. Lena woke once, convinced someone was walking around the perimeter. A headlamp revealed nothing. Morning brought nervous laughter about potentially calling the local paper with a mysterious lights over Clear Pond story. Breakfast and coffee felt more pressing. While packing, we noticed a dark, unmarked sedan pulling up just after sunrise. Something felt off. People don't typically arrive at 8 to observe a campsite. 2 men in suits emerged, not cheap city attire, but formal, crisp, with neat ties and clean shoes. They approached slowly, deliberately. "Morning," said the taller man in a flat, neutral tone. I kept the memory folded away like a receipt forgotten in a glove compartment. Eventually I threw it out while moving a box of path maps. The memory of that night hangs differently than other odd things. Less like a movie, and more like a small missing tile in the floor you notice when walking into a room. Their reaction surprised me not because of my honesty, but in a way that had nothing to do with what I said. When I described the blue as a pale, clean winter blue, their brief confusion felt like a keyed mismatch. No threat, no alarm, just the expression you get when a script you've recited 100 times breaks on the wrong page. They never came back. The station stayed open. The highway continued carrying its careless traffic. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures. The camera couldn't capture it properly, just white smears. But the screen showed something, and seeing it there made it feel more real somehow. 2 men approached us with an unusual stillness, their demeanor precise and unnerving. They spoke directly without introduction, focused solely on what we had witnessed over Clear Pond the previous night. No phones, no notepads, just intense observation. Describe exactly what you saw, they instructed, interrupting any attempt to offer explanations. We complied, detailing our encounter meticulously. 3 lights, hovering about 20 feet above the water, moving together, silently, no sound, no typical explanation. Their questions probed specific details. Electronics acted strangely during the event. Ren heard a high-pitched ringing. Lena's phone switched on and off while trying to photograph the lights. Maya's pocket compass spun erratically. Our camera photos were just smudged dots, video files glitchy and distorted. To each revelation, they nodded silently. When we pressed about their identity, they offered only a cryptic response, routine follow-up. Their appearance was unsettling, skin untouched by wind, dark eyes that didn't blink normally. I whispered these observations to Omar, who acknowledged them reluctantly. They were particularly interested in who else knew about our observation. Had we shared anything on social media? I'd posted one photo on a local community page. Lena had mentioned it to someone. Their interest seemed carefully calculated. The ranger station, 2 strangers in black suits, continued their matter-of-fact questioning. The shorter man requested our names, waiting expectantly without reaching for any recording device. We introduced ourselves, Maya, Bren, Lena, and about the entire encounter. We were at the campsite when the encounter happened. 2 men approached us, one shorter, one taller. When someone asked if they had names, the shorter man responded adversely that names weren't necessary. His companion added coldly they had necessary identifiers, his tiny smile not reaching his eyes. Without warning, they turned and walked directly into the woods from the path, moving as if through a hallway. Their movement was impossibly smooth. We watched, stunned, as the morning light seemed to absorb their figures completely. They vanished through the trees, leaving no trace, no rustling leaves, no broken branches, just a sudden absence. Lena broke our shocked silence, asking where'd they go. We realized they had completely disappeared. The light through the pines looked unchanged, as if they had never existed. Following procedure, we called the ranger, but he was out checking a damage sign and didn't arrive for 40 minutes. When he finally came and we described the encounter, he nodded slowly, took our names, and made a note in his book. Later, When he drove to check the trail cameras, there was nothing, no record, no evidence of the mysterious visitors. The empty grassy path and tree stretch looked completely still. Our car stood alone at the camp entrance with no other vehicles in sight. No footprints marked the soft ground where the men beamed, and the mud near the boat launch bore only our tracks. We packed up faster than planned. Nobody felt like fishing or swimming after that strange encounter, Ren said. The air seemed too thin, like you suddenly became aware of your own breathing. Maya laughed at small jokes that weren't really funny. Her face pale. Lena kept rubbing her eyes, saying something about the man's coffee-colored eyes made her skin crawl. Omar drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. We didn't stop until we passed the town signs, the highway swallowing our tires. Back home, I reviewed the photos again. One picture I thought captured the lights best showed a thin grey line near the tree, a brief glimpse of the taller man's shoulder blown up. It was just grainy shadows. Nothing definitive. Mia's phone had a similar smudge. Ren mentioned his camera had corrupted the last 2 files. Lenena claimed her compass had spun oddly for 15 minutes after leaving the site. Not knowing what to make of it, I posted in the local group thread using our real names. We returned to our normal lives after that day. Work, apartments, grocery stores, bus stops. The 2 men who asked precise questions had simply walked into the trees and vanished without leaving any trace. No official call came, and no local police responded. The ranger from the Division of Natural Lands had dropped off a business card saying he'd check County Dispatch about any missing person reports. People were talking, wanting an official record instead of rumors. Some reported seeing strange lights in the days before. Others suggested LED kites, and one comment warned people like us against camping alone. A woman who writes a bird-watching column had asked to interview us but never followed up. I've been hiking the Ridgeway Trail since childhood, knowing exactly when to put the phone away and when to take it out. This was August with that hot dusk where the air hangs like a blanket and bugs make a steady shush in the leaves. Work had run over, so I started late and was above the 3rd switchback when something appeared. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe sunlight dragging off the stream surface or a guy with a flashlight in bad timing, but it was higher than the tree line. Definitely not a reflection. Silver, perhaps 20 to 30 feet across, flattened on the bottom like a coin suspended on its edge. I moved slowly and deliberately. No jerks, no wings, and absolutely no sound. Birds kept flying past without spooks. The air remained unchanged. I filmed it because I couldn't not. My hand was slightly shaky, aware I might later need to defend this as not being a hallucination. The clip didn't capture much, just the usual grainy darkness, the silver smear, but when I replayed it, the motion looked strange. The object slid left, paused, then drifted behind the ridgeline. I stayed put for a long time, sweating and thinking. That night, I didn't post the clip. I told myself I'd sleep on it, but sleep never came. Brent mentioned the incident twice at work, but his colleagues just shrugged it off. The next day, I watched the footage on my laptop, knowing digital things can't always be trusted. Cameras crop and compress, and phone cameras especially struggle in low light. Every so often, I open the folder with the photos. I zoom in on the smear, trying to steady it into a face. I tell myself not to make anything of it, but something keeps drawing me back. Not 2 nights after my hike, a black sedan appeared on the curb across from my house. I live on a narrow lane where overnight parking is uncommon, so this immediately felt odd. The car was an older model, but in near perfect condition. Its windows were heavily tinted, headlights off, with no engine noise. The lane smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt. At exactly 2:13 a.m., which I confirmed on my phone, the vehicle sat motionless. My dog, Gus, usually sound asleep, got up and padded to the door. He sat silently staring out the window in a way that felt like a warning. Gus isn't skittish, so his behavior seemed significant. When the car finally left, it moved slowly and quietly, rolling away and disappearing at the first intersection as if deliberately avoiding attention. For a week, the sedan appeared at the same time and place like a precise ritual. I tried catching someone getting out, even stepping into the backyard in my shorts and flip-flops, calling out toward the lane. My voice sounded silly against the quiet stillness. The car remained unmoved. Once I thought I saw a silhouette in the passenger side, someone leaning forward, but when I blinked, it vanished. The sedan had been parked at the same time each night, 2:13 a.m. that evening. While sitting at the kitchen table with a clip-on loop, strange things started happening. My wall clock slipped a minute forward, which I initially dismissed as a quirk of a cheap timepiece. Then my bedside alarm blinked 2:13 a.m., even though I turned it off. When I nudged it, the display corrected itself. These tiny incidents made me notice my surroundings differently. I began observing how light hit the windows, almost searching for hidden seams. The men in suits were polite. They asked us to recount our observations without writing anything down. They said names weren't necessary. They walked into the woods and stopped being visible. That's what happened. I drove home. I called the number on the Rose's card once to ask if anything had turned up. Left a message. They never returned. The outdoor blog I write for is run by Ben, a close friend who responds to my messages with jokes only we understand. After sending him a noisy file with an odd shape, he suggested coming up next weekend with binoculars more of the day than here is. But every time I think of those two men turning toward the pines and vanishing, I find myself checking the door twice before bed. My old analog watch sat meticulously synchronized by the wall clock. I'd set up strategies to understand the unnerving routine that was developing. The cheap motion camera aimed at the street, went up on the porch, and I'd leave the hallway light on with blinds open. Some nights I'd sit in my car, with the engine running, radio low, watching and waiting. Each night brought new theories. Maybe it belonged to a co-worker's friend. Perhaps someone was monitoring potential car thieves. The human brain loves finding patterns, and I was caught in one. Ben wanted the video clip, believing he could enhance the image with special filters. I was reluctant to share what felt like my private evidence, something I might need to prove my experience someday. I made copies, sliding one into the top drawer's SD card. On the 8th night, something changed. The car stayed until 3:01 a.m., sending a small adrenaline kick through me. At 3:02, it turned down the block and stopped directly across from my house. I couldn't wait any longer. With keys and flashlight in hand, I went outside. Gus, my dog, followed, but stopped at the doorway. Not a confrontational type, the car's windows were black, its license plate seemingly ordinary. But when my flashlight hit it, the digits blurred into indistinct shapes. Feeling exposed, I called out, "Hey!" with forced assertiveness. Silence hung in the air. Then, with mechanical precision, the passenger window lowered slightly. A hand emerged, tapping the driver's side glass, a gesture so calculated it seemed almost rhythmic. No sound, no movement, just the car idling with an unnerving radioactive patience. I stood waiting for some human reaction, for footsteps, for a phone's buzz. Nothing came. The car's interior was a dark cave around me. For the next 2 days, the vehicle remained parked with Gus silently watching from the window without making a sound. Ben arrived the following weekend, bringing large binoculars and a skeptical expression. He spent an afternoon on my roof advising me to calm down and take practical steps if I felt followed. That night I spotted the bi-sedan again and called 911. The dispatcher explained that, without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. I felt both ridiculous and strangely safe enough to be dismissed. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. My phone, normally charging perfectly on the nightstand, displayed only a black screen. Not empty street, held a strange void. A black rectangle about a meter wide, exactly where a car had been. Frame-by-frame analysis revealed nothing unusual. In one instant, the street existed. The next, a column of emptiness appeared. Then the street returned. The timestamps were peculiar. The camera logged the clip at 21:37, and the garage DVR displayed a similar pattern. A brief grey interruption before normally resumed. Attempting to play the missing fragment on my laptop caused the media player to stall completely. A week later, I trailed the car from the intersection, keeping a steady 50-yard distance. My goal was simple: catch a glimpse of the license plate. The vehicle moved with unsettling consistency, never adjusting its speed. We passed stoplights, and at the second one, something extraordinary occurred. The car eased forward and then vanished without hesitation. The road ahead stood completely empty with the GPS showing a solid line. I checked my mirror. No brake lights. I honked like an idiot for a moment. Suddenly, the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb as if waiting for me to notice something specific. I was approaching a moment of raw honesty. This wasn't random. No ordinary prankster could orchestrate something. Then they came to the door. It was a Tuesday. Rain fell like the world was being thoroughly rinsed. Gus wagged his tail but remained silent when the knock came. The digital clock on my microwave flickered awake at 2:13 a.m., right as the knocking started. 3 precise measured raps on the front step. When I opened the door, 2 men stood in the darkness, their black umbrellas folded like swords, long black coats draped over well-tailored suits. They were nothing like typical late-night visitors. Clean shoes, simple faces, neither young nor old, with neutral expressions that made their eyes seem just a bit too intent. "Good evening," said the taller one, sounding like a radio announcer without warmth. "We are here to speak about your footage." My heart seized. I hadn't told anyone I'd filmed anything. The private proof sat in my top drawer, and suddenly I felt sick. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The shorter man spoke slowly. "We are with the office. We need to review the original file." I started to ask how they knew, then caught myself. They spread their hands, arms up, in a gesture that seemed almost conciliatory. "We're not here to make trouble," the tall one said. I sat on my porch, locked in a tense negotiation with 2 strangers. The SD card rested in my drawer, tempting me to hand it over and end this encounter. But something inside me resisted being pushed around. I told them I didn't want anyone going through my stuff demanding they show a badge if they were law enforcement. They exchanged a look, that unspoken communication that passes silently between people who understand each other. "We are not law enforcement in the familiar sense," the taller one said casually, as if discussing the weather. The shorter man asked about auditory disturbances. My throat tightened as I slowly replied no. They smiled simultaneously, a practiced gesture that felt rehearsed. "Thank you for your cooperation," the tall one said. The shorter man nodded, tilting his head like someone checking off an item on a list. Then they turned and walked away, stepping off the porch into the rainy darkness. No car waited. They simply vanished like figures falling behind heavy curtains. For a while, the nights rearranged themselves around that precise moment. I still check the trees when the wind dies down. Some nights I wake up and sit with my phone, watching time change. Life continued. I slept. I went to work. I hiked the ridgeway when weather permitted. Then Eric called just after midnight, his voice carrying a nervous edge I'd rarely heard before. "Dude, what the hell did you send me?" I was half asleep, drifting between dreams and waking. I told him I hadn't sent anything, but he insisted I'd texted a picture minutes ago. My messages app showed nothing. Ben had run the file through filters, but it never revealed more than a silver smear. He'd warned me not to post it after a reporter called, asking about the source of outdoor phenomena. He brushed the man off, working with freelance contacts. After those 2 men came asking for the file, things returned to normal. Gus stopped pacing by the window at 2:13. The porch camera remained quiet. Sometimes I pull out the clip and stare at that silver smear, wondering what those men on my porch had really seen. They had said so little, merely stating they needed to review the original file and weren't there to cause trouble. They left the problem exactly where it had been, on a small, private, unsettled shelf of my life. I know Woe Man in Black stood on my porch. I know he clocked on my microwave lie up at 23 for a while, and hen I didn't. Gus is a lighter sleeper now. He's become someone who pays an enorn or small things differently. The street was his same rain stretcher had been for years. Loud in me that was he last night. He car pulled up. I handed his SD card, and a few days later, and told him he whole abridged and messy. He asked, keep a copy showed he odd black rectangle. The car never came. I'm no saying I know what they were or what he car was. I don't. Eric's voice sounded unsound when he first mentioned he photo something by glowing shape hanging over here the edge of my neighborhood. I denied sending anything Bawi. He insisted I came from my number. No sent photos, no recent exitics. My last message of him was just a meme about our fantasy league from 2 days ago. Describe what you're looking right now. He said suddenly my bedroom was dark with closed curtains. My phone was meha. In my hand, when I swiped off my gallery, nothing new appeared. The last picture was from a previous weekend. Eric exhaled sharply and said he'd sent the image back of me. The incoming photo made my stomach it. I looked like he would he edge of my street, pine and bare oak silhouettes, power lines sloping overhead. And just above, he read a pale, glowing shaped, no bright like a spotlight but hazy and diffused like a jellyfish life from within. The glow seemed to blend with the night, creating an indistinct boundary. I'd never seen anything like it. "Where did you miss?" I whispered. "From you," Eric responded. "I literally says it's from you." Neither of us spoke for a moment. He suggested my phone might have been hacked, by his words lacked conviction. I slid off he bed and crossed a he window peeking roughy hin bar of street, lie leaking a hay curtains. The street was empty. He raised a block's end, dark and still. When I asked Erico send a screenshot of his messages, he complied. The IMS matched a moment of his call, showing my name, a he and he mysterious photo. "I'm coming over," he said abruptly. I protested. Pahe was resolute. The line went dead. I remained a he window watching he street. No cars were visible. My eyes kept returning. Oh, he strange photograph, its unsighted lying glow lingering in my mind. The park entrance was a familiar sight. That slight uphill angle I knew from the sidewalk at the block's end. My phone's camera app captured minimal details. The photo was taken at 12:03 a.m. with no GPS or device information attached. Eric texted at 12:20 a.m. saying he was outside. I threw on a hoodie and went downstairs. He stood by his running car looking unsettled. We confirmed I hadn't sent the mysterious photo. He turned his phone toward me, showing the faintly glowing image on the screen. Power lines were visible at the park entrance. "I know where this is," he said. "Let's go look," Eric suggested. We walked down the street together. A dry cold seeped through my clothes, making me shiver. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally loud in the hollow air. At the park entrance, everything appeared normal. The wooden sign, gravel path, and trees stood black against the sky. "No glow," Eric muttered quietly. I kept watching the tree line, expecting something to change. Nothing did. "You still have the photo?" I asked. He nodded, holding up his phone. "It looks like it's right here over those trees," he pointed. "Just darkness," I replied. We stood there for a long time. Eventually Eric proposed a theory. "Maybe someone spoofed your number. Some kind of prank." I challenged it. "Then why does the picture look like it was taken here?" He fell silent. We walked back to my house. He didn't come inside, just got in his car and left. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge with the lights off. My phone lay on the nightstand. I checked messages repeatedly, waiting for something new. Nothing appeared. When I opened my gallery later, the same old photos remain. No trace of that glowing shape, but with my eyes closed, I could still see it hanging over the trees, faint and silent, like a lantern underwater. The next morning, Eric's text stunned me. The photo was gone from his phone. I asked for details. He explained the message remained, but the image was blank, as if it never existed. I checked our message thread. His screenshot from that night was intact, but the image he'd received was now just a grey box with a question mark. I scrolled through my photos again, still nothing new. What happened that night remains a mystery to both of us. Now, when I walk past the park entrance after dark, I can't help but look up at the power lines and trees. Sometimes a pale glowing shape might be waiting where only a camera can catch it. The night was thick with fog, the kind that hangs in the streets like forgotten curtains and makes the world feel smaller. The parcel bay was half full, the scanner hanging on my belt after finishing the usual run through waterfront warehouses and flats. Dundee had quieted for the night just past 11. The fog seemed to swallow sounds, creating an almost tangible silence. The radio was the first odd thing. I always kept it tuned low, some background noise to stay alert. For a while, everything felt normal. A local station playing a late-night show, but as I turned onto Lockey Road, it suddenly went to static. This wasn't the familiar fade-out hiss, but a thin, insect-like static that rose and fell like something breathing near the aerial. I flickered for a second, then cut to a mechanical silence, as if someone had pressed mute on the world. The display blinked, showing no station. I turned the dial. Nothing. Then it returned. Another thin, static sweep before falling silent again. This wasn't a regular broken connection, but more like a hesitation in the air. I told myself it was just interference from old buildings or the van's aging wiring. Saying it out loud made it feel less like my imagination was playing tricks. That's what I kept telling myself for the first 5 minutes. The fog made everything anonymous. Street lights blurred into halos that didn't reach the pavement. Terraces on Tay Street had curtains drawn like shy houses. The city's night workers, who usually keep things moving, or mostly gone, which meant fewer sounds to orient yourself by. Even the dogs weren't barking much. A small, constant city hum had been reduced to a tick. Then the van itself started acting strange. The engine was warm and steady, but for a heartbeat. The dashboard lights dimmed slightly, as if someone had tightened a hand on the electrics. It was quick, barely a second, and the heater fan kept turning like nothing had happened. I put the van into gear, pulled up, and everything felt ordinary. One of those little failures you shrug at because nothing major came of it. I left the rear doors open to let the fog drift through the back of the van so it wouldn't hold the smell of other people's packages. The fog inside the bay made everything look soft and out of focus. I had a parcel for a first-floor flat. When I climbed the steps, the stairwell lights dimmed as if they were being watched. The woman who answered the door had her hair in a towel and looked as if she'd expected noise and got a silence instead. She said nothing about it. People don't always say what they notice. It's easier to let odd things slide. And I was inside the van with the heater running, watching raindrops beat against the window. The radio crackled with static, breaking the silence intermittently. My scanner peeped, signaling a new delivery code for the docks. Dave's voice came through the headset, initially clear, but then distorting strangely words, flattening and hissing as if swallowed and then spat out. He asked if I could take an extra parcel. Without much thought, I agreed, not wanting to be the driver who refuses work. The call dropped, and the headset showed no signal, though it recovered within seconds. Driving toward the docks along familiar routes, I noticed the fog growing denser. As I approached the river, an unusual smell caught my attention. A faint metallic tang with a hint of sweetness, like forgotten pennies left to oxidize. It reminded me of old hospitals and preserved specimens. I dismissed the thought as ridiculous, but the scent persisted around the blighted warehouses. Suddenly, the fog thinned momentarily, revealing a pale light hovering above the rooftops. This was the third odd occurrence that felt more substantial than a technical glitch. It wasn't a street light or lamp, but a soft white glow about the size of a slow-moving cloud pocket level with the terrace roofs. Motionless, it hung like a misplaced lantern. I pulled over partly out of curiosity, partly to avoid looking foolish in traffic, though there were no other vehicles around. The glow remained, a strange beacon over the rows of houses. No sound emerged from its position. The fog hung low. The city seemed muted with dark roofs and sealed windows, surrounded by an inexplicable luminescence. Then, without warning, a light shot upward through the fog so quickly it made my stomach lurch. It pierced straight up, like an invisible wand, cutting a clear path through the mist before vanishing into the cloud layer. No sound accompanied this movement. No wind stirred. Suddenly, the radio cleared. Dave's voice returned, asking about my parking spot. I answered briefly. He mentioned losing my signal momentarily, with my GPS showing my location. No connection. I stopped in a place with no connection. The transition felt oddly smooth. One moment disrupted, the next perfectly normal. My hands trembled, though I told myself it was just nerves. I completed my deliveries, gripping the wheel tightly as the city slowly hummed back to life. Small things felt off-kilter. The dash clock jumped 30 seconds before settling. My nearly dead phone now showed a full battery. The delivery scanner revealed a missed scan I later found in the van. A route, normally taking 15 minutes, stretched to 17. These little irregularities were minor on paper, but they left a strange metallic taste. A pub door slammed somewhere. A taxi rolled past. I stopped at a late-night van for coffee where two guys were laughing about a football match. They hadn't seen anything in the fog, or if they had, they weren't talking. People often choose silence during strange moments, preferring to compare notes later. At the depot, I tried discussing it with Kenny, who parks next to me. He just shrugged, saying, "The fog plays tricks when you're tired." And maybe he was right. Exhaustion can certainly rearrange reality. I had a conversation about the pale light, and he told me about rumors of drone tests along the coast. His tone carried both the story and a hint of something more. By the time I left the depot, the fog had thinned, transforming into a mist that would dissolve by morning. I drove home with the stereo low, listening to the same cheeky presenter. An old man at the street lights waved and I waved back. His expression held that familiar look, people get when waiting for someone to return home. Inside, I sat in the kitchen with the kettle steaming, staring at the circle of condensation on the window, where the street lamp cast a faint halo. I didn't share everything with my partner, just the parts that sounded reasonable. A radio with intermittent signals, odd battery readings, a bright light in the fog that suddenly appeared. She made tea and nodded in that way she does when my work takes on an unusual tone. She asked if I was okay, and I assured her I was. The truth lingered in my thoughts. How quickly the light vanished in the preceding silence. The radio's sudden clarity stood out as the most reliable detail amid a night of strange occurrences. Later, I reviewed the dashcam footage. Fog, the van, the street, and in one frame, a pale blur rising. The replay seemed choppy, with the blur appearing and disappearing between frames. Static interrupted the audio. Sleep came fitfully that night. At dawn, I awoke to rain with children playing outside and the city humming its usual morning rhythms. Fog lingered in small puddles and damp scents hung on washing lines. As the next day unfolded normally, bright roads welcomed holiday travelers and buses followed their usual routes. During quiet moments, like filling the kettle on grey evenings, I find myself listening for subtle underlying sounds. Silence mostly prevails, though occasionally out of habit. I glance at the rooftops. The memory sits like an unlabeled object in a drawer, precise enough to feel real, yet too elusive to fully grasp. I was approaching the final stretch of the Farmington night flight, clear skies overhead and a slender moon hanging. Night has a way of making you contemplate how small everything seems. Trimmed for 554, I sat with autopilot engaged, a half-empty sit inside the console. Flight radios remained quiet, punctuated only by occasional handoffs and a distant cargo truck crackling on 1215 sounding 3 counties away. This was a routine leg I'd flown countless times before. Out the left window, something moved into the landing lights cone. At first I mistook it for a star, but it wasn't too close. Positioned about the same angle off the nose as the wingtip, maybe 5 or 6 miles to the left, and seemingly at our exact altitude. No blinking, no navigation lights, no strobes, just a dark, hard edge against the sky. A kind of shape that seems to absorb starlight. Initially, I rationalized it as unexpected traffic, maybe an unlisted crop duster or banner tow. I checked the transponder, toggled to ident, and listened for any TCAS warnings. Nothing. The EFI showed the usual blank space where traffic would display. My transponder was transmitting and the ADSB was showing earlier heard traffic. Equipment appeared functional, yet this object held its position relative to us like it belonged in the same airspace. I called Center Cessna 7K visual traffic. Left 2 o'clock, same altitude, same intentions. The response came back clear and practiced. 7K QH Center, Roger. We show no primary or secondary target in your area. Maintain present heading and altitude. No target. I double-checked the heading, glanced at the GPS track and looked out the window again. The object had matched my ground track and speed, not perfectly aligned, like 2 planes occasionally fly side by side, but keeping pace as if glued together. I disengaged the autopilot and moved the yoke to feel the motion. My velocity vector guided me as I banked left 3 to get for a better look. Suddenly, the aircraft behaved in a way that defied description. I wasn't turning or banking. I was rolling as if gravity had loosened its grip. The rotation happened on a sideways axis with a slow, lazy motion, completely unlike any typical airplane movement. Then it slid laterally opposite my bank, moving with an almost water-like fluidity. No acceleration, no plume, no wake. We moved like dance partners following an unspoken complex choreography. Everything seemed normal until something unusual caught my attention. My radio contact with center remained steady despite the growing tension inside me. Traffic appeared perfectly parallel, moving westward. After a moment of static, the controller responded. I now understand they were scanning their scope for primary returns. Their response was clear. No targets, no interference detected, yet something felt off. I meticulously checked my systems. The headset carried a subtle, precise noise signaling potential issues. I toggled frequencies, checked the squelch, examined the standby, and adjusted the audio panel. Everything functioned normally. PTO heat on, vacuum steady, alternators green. The panel clock blinked momentarily before resuming its routine. Ordinary systems performed ordinary tasks while something extraordinary existed just outside. Grabbing the binoculars from under the glare shield, I noticed they were cold and damp, as if they'd been somewhere unexpectedly chill. Raising them, I saw a shape unlike any typical aircraft. Geometric, not rounded. Its edges appeared matte, refusing to reflect. No landing lights, windows, tail, or propeller blur were visible. This object simply existed, matching my position precisely. When I shifted to view it head-on, it responded by banking right. I carefully maintained airspeed, avoiding unnecessary altitude changes and keeping manual control. The object's movement defied conventional logic. I slid away as if tethered to an invisible string, completing a lazy turn and drifting sideways across the horizon. No noise, no thermal wake accompanied its motion, reminiscent of smoke dispersing in reverse. I contacted approach on the guard channel, reporting my tail number and the visual traffic at my 1 o'clock position, matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Their response was unequivocal. No targets detected in the OM sector. Only my transponder and known traffic appeared on their screens. Note, my watch was 5 minutes fast and then corrected itself. The thermostat slid on the console for no reason when I eased back to neutral trim. My phone set to record had one file that corrupted into a single unopenable blob. Another file showed only 3 frames of a dark smear. Then blackness my phone described as unsupported. Pilots estimate the object was approximately 2 to 3 miles left. Same altitude. I watched for 2 minutes as it transformed from a curious puzzle to simply not being there at all. At some point the silhouette narrowed and brightened like a lens-bending light. I thought it might ignite, strobe, or exhaust, some simple physical reveal. Instead, it tightened into a point with no phase change, no spray, nothing you could point to as a mechanism. It simply waked out. One moment, an indigo cut against the lower sky. The next, gone. No transit across the stars, no streak. The place where it had been was empty, like someone had lifted a birdcage. After that, small things unsettled in the cockpit. I told the controller I had a recording and they'd mark it in the strip for engineers, but they didn't ask for the file. They only asked if I wanted to divert. I did not. There was nothing to divert, so that made sense. We continued into Farmington like a ship. Resuming course after passing an insignificant fog, my hands hovered above the yoke on approach, as if not touching it would be safer. The wind held steady, the runway came up, and the landing was exactly the kind of brightness these instruments train you for. On the ground, I taxied in slow and left the lights on because the cabin still had that odd electric cooling I couldn't explain. I filled out paperwork at the FBO between customers and tried to get someone to look at the files. Maintenance checked my transponder traces, ATC printout, and GPS log. They found nothing out of order except one tiny anomaly in the GPS track where ground speed showed a half-second blip. The controllers sent me the radar tape. I was clean where we'd been. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night. One of them said that explained anything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there'd be a report. I flew. Now I've been flying planes for years, but something fundamentally changed in me after that night. My name's Dave Hollis, born and raised in this part of Ohio. I worked nights at a local gas station, so foggy drives weren't new to me. This particular night was different. I was driving home late just outside Ashtabula when the fog rolled in. Thick, low-hanging mist swallowed the road completely. One moment I was cruising along Route 20 near Lake Erie. The next, the world turned grey and dense like someone had dropped a heavy blanket over the entire area. About 5 miles past Geneva, heading west toward home, I spotted headlights approaching through the mist. They seemed normal at first, except these lights never actually passed me. They appeared to float in the fog, getting closer but never moving beyond my position. No engine sound, no tire noise, just 2 steady beams cutting through the grayness. I slowed down, watching carefully. The lights stayed directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away, moving as if they wanted to meet me. Pulling onto the gravel shoulder, I hoped to give the other driver space to pass, but the lights simply stopped, suspended in the fog. Silence enveloped me, interrupted only by my idling engine. Suddenly, a soft, hazy glow appeared about 50 yards ahead. Blue and white. It wasn't like any car light or street lamp. It just existed, floating 3 or 4 feet above the ground. I squinted, straining to understand what I was seeing, but the fog obscured any clear view. Then a glow shot straight up like someone had flipped a switch, rising smoothly and quickly into the sky. Now I always double-check everything. The transponder, the squitter, frequency, wing flex, even the F-thermos under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's my job and I've been doing it for years. But when I'm heading to Farmington and something dark occupies a star's usual spot, I report a bit earlier. The controller always responds that nothing is showing. They always do. People always try to categorize experiences, like mine. Weather balloon, experimental drone, optical illusion. None of these explanations fit what I witnessed. I drove home that night and filed my incident notes, giving my wife a condensed version. I didn't want to burden her with something that might sound like I was losing my grip. There was this empty patch of sky that kept replaying in my mind. As I lifted off, an eerie silence enveloped everything. The familiar background sounds vanished completely. No crickets chirped. No distant highway traffic rumbled. Not even the hum of my truck's engine could be heard. The entire world seemed to pause in that moment. Frozen and still, I switched off the truck and rolled down the window, straining to listen. Absolute silence surrounded me. No birds called, no breeze rustled. Not even the typical insect sounds emerged from the weeds. The mysterious headlights that had been present earlier were now gone. Gradually, the fog began to thin, and normal nighttime sounds slowly crept back into existence. I continued driving, my eyes constantly scanning the shadowy movements in the woods beside the road. There, the rest of the journey proceeded without incident. An unsettling sensation lingered, the feeling of being watched, as if something had silently slipped past me in the dense fog. Upon returning home, I meticulously checked the locks and sat staring out the window at the dark road. I still cannot explain the nature of that light or its purpose. But I know with certainty that the profound silence I experienced was real. If you ever find yourself driving through thick fog near Ashtabula late at night, watch those headlights carefully. Sleep is a critical component of overall health that significantly impacts our physical and mental well-being. Most adults need between 7-9 hours of rest each night, but many struggle to achieve this recommended amount. Chronic sleep deprivation can lead to serious health complications, including increased risk of heart disease, weakened immune function, and cognitive decline. The human body relies on sleep to repair and restore itself. During these crucial nighttime hours, the brain processes information, consolidates memories, and clears out toxins that accumulate during waking hours. Hormonal regulation also occurs during sleep, which helps maintain proper metabolism, growth, and stress management. Different sleep stages play unique roles in bodily recovery. Deep sleep, for instance, is essential for physical restoration. While REM sleep supports emotional processing and cognitive function, the body cycles through these stages multiple times throughout the night, each cycle lasting approximately 90 minutes. Factors like stress, irregular work schedules, electronic device usage, and poor sleep environments can disrupt normal sleep patterns. Creating a consistent bedtime routine, managing stress, limiting screen time before bed, and maintaining a comfortable sleep quality and duration. Understanding sleep's complexity reveals its fundamental importance to human health. Without adequate rest, our bodies cannot effectively regenerate, process information, or maintain optimal physical and mental performance. Prioritizing sleep is not a luxury, but a necessity for maintaining overall wellness and preventing long-term health.